need the chassis compliance to be really good. On the long straights, they were hopeless. Monza, they'd always take a 52-place grid penalty because they'd just write it off as a weekend, and that's the power unit, really. I can't really remember last time Red Bull didn't have a very strong chassis aero package.
You're right. Even in those days of the poor engine, it was the aero that was the team's strength. Always was, always has been. And that's, what are we looking at, a decade more?
2008.
17.
We're going back to 2008. Maybe they had an underwhelming year in 2018, 2019, maybe 2020. There was Verstappen and Albon, and they were struggling a bit with a snappier rear end. There are definitely probably times where it's not been a world beater of a car as well, but they don't miss often.
No.
Fernando Alonso continuing on his way. We are, if you're just switching on, if you're getting your day started, nothing wild has happened in the opening hour of testing. In fact, the only headline I can tell you so far is that we've had some wide moments, some moments of opposite lock, and we've had a aero rake come loose on the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, and that is all we've got to report in the first hour. But of course, we're enjoying seeing these new cars on track for the first time with the same camera setup that we'll have for the Grand Prix as well. So getting our eye in for the new season, enjoying the new livery, enjoying the new technical components, comparing what we've seen from the launch images to what we've got in reality around this Bahrain International Circuit, which will again be hosting the season opener. First Grand Prix held here back in 2004. It was Michael Schumacher winning that day, and then it was Alonso in the years that followed, pinching a win of Michael Schumacher. The first time this place held the season opener back in 2006. And I'm not sure even Fernando Alonso expected to still be behind the wheel by the time that we got to 2024. But we are grateful that he is there as he slows down across the line, does a constant speed run, and checking the mirrors as he does so as well. All part of the calibration for the engineers to pore over the data. So he continues to look in that mirror on the left-hand side, check that no one is behind. 2 hours, 43 minutes to go in this morning session. 4 hours to come after an hour lunch break as well.
Lovely stuff. I'm loving seeing all of the little details on the car that maybe we hadn't picked out or noticed in launch season, and indeed the ones which were deliberately kept from us by Photoshop or strategically placed lighting. I'm looking forward to getting down. I'm going to the pit lane in a little bit to go and do some pit reporting for you guys, give Ted a break. I can't wait to see the McLaren because the floor area, the side pods, that was something that was kept very dark from their launch renders as we take a look down there in Red Bull. Was that Rupert with Max? Yeah, Carlos's former trainer has shifted camps and moved over to work with Max Verstappen. I saw him at Heathrow Airport on the way out. What are you doing here? He said, I'm working with Max now. It's like, wow. Yeah, Rupes, great guy, great trainer. Big loss for Carlos. Those two were like brothers.
They were surprised to hear that change, but that is another route for Max Verstappen this year.
Big change for me this year is the noses. We've got such a differentiation in the noses. The Alpine looks like an old F2 nose. Wide, flat. The RB I think is very interesting, very kind of conical. But yeah, big differentiation, not just between teams, but from what the teams were running last year to this. And of course that Mercedes, that intriguing front wing, how they've been able to reduce that upper fourth element on the inside close to the nose, I think is a fascinating innovation.
Esteban Ocon in the last year of his contract.
Should we get back to driver chat? Why
not?
I mean, so I read an interview with you this morning, actually, over breakfast, in which you said you didn't believe that Andrea Kimi Antonelli would come to Formula One even if he wins F2 this year. And I've got one thing I love about the fact that we have a potentially crazy driver market for next year and it's, the much debated lack of rookies, Formula 2 champions coming to Formula 1 over the last few years. I would love to see this driver market shake up with some really intriguing young drivers and drivers we maybe haven't seen or thought of. And I would love it, because the only thing that is going to match Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari is Mercedes taking a punt on Antonelli. And let's be honest, he is desperately impressive. Like Lewis Hamilton in junior Formula, impressive.
Oh, without doubt. And if you're unfamiliar with the name of Andrea Kimi Antonelli, you're going to be hearing it a lot. You're going to be hearing a junior driver of 17 years of age talked about like he's already on the grid, as we see our first big moment of the day for Esteban Ocon coming out of turn 4 and having a trip to the gravel.
Sweaty times for Ocon. Full lock stops to try and catch that. Just the car snapping as he was applying. Didn't seem to be too aggressive power coming out of turn 4. But you come over the crest there, the rear of the car goes light, and C2 tyres, again, quite hard. One step softer than what the Red Bull of Max Verstappen was running earlier and struggling with similarly. And Ocon using everything and maybe even a little bit of luck to keep that one in a straight line.
So Antonelli, Jakesy.
Yes, so there are a lot of talented drivers on the F2 grid this year, but Antonelli is being talked up enormously because he is part of that Mercedes program. He is the FRECA champion who has bypassed Formula 3.
And that's the big thing here.
And has been placed straight into Formula 2. We've had drivers like Max Verstappen, like Lance Stroll, who have just jumped straight up from the 3rd tier to Formula 1. But he's bypassed the 3rd tier. He's been placed with a team with championship pedigree in Prema, who brought through the likes of Charles Leclerc. He is incredibly highly rated. If you talk on a podcast for 45 minutes and squish all the answers together, sometimes an either-or question could look different if you
Jake says
put it all
Antonelli
into
one
one article and you just rely on the pull quotes. But equally, if you go on a podcast, you take that chance. I think...
So what did you say? Can you clear it up?
Yeah, I think it would make more sense to do a Leclerc, having not seen one session of Formula 2 so far. The ultimate thing is, let them race, let's see who performs well, let's see who does well. Reputations don't win titles, drivers do. You have to perform. Formula 2 is incredibly competitive. But if you were going to promote him, I think it's an incredibly difficult ask to ask someone to go from being a FRECA champion to a Mercedes Formula 1 driver in such a short space of time.
Even if he wins the championship?
Yes, because a difference between, let's say he's half a second off George Russell in his first ever Formula 1 qualifying session, okay? If you're with a Williams, or if you're with a Sauber, like we're looking at on screen at the moment, you can learn the ropes. I thought one of the useful things for Oscar Piastri last year is that McLaren did get a bit of a slow start. So his early races in Formula 1 were outside of the focus of, say, a Q3. If you're a Mercedes Formula 1 driver, you're expected to get to Q3. How close the field spread is, I just think you're heaping a lot of pressure on. That said, if he's phenomenal, if he starts winning for fun, like we saw with Russell, like we saw with Charles Leclerc, then there's going to be a huge clamour to promote it.
So I've always been of the opinion that you're ready when you're ready, and I mean that in terms of Formula 1 has looked towards younger and younger drivers over time, to the extent that older drivers got passed over, and I always thought that was a bit harsh. You know, okay, it took you 2 years, 3 years to win the F2 title. I don't think that should matter, because quality should shine through, and it shouldn't matter how long it takes you. If you're good enough, you should be there. And I think if Antonelli does show that he's good enough, I would love to see him in that Mercedes, very wobbly rear wing on that Sauber with the DRS open, the top element there. Look, the exceptions tend to be the exceptional. Verstappen, straight out of F3 after, what, a season in cars? Straight into F1. Didn't look out of place? Not at all. Okay, he was in the Toro Rosso and then they bumped him up after a season and a bit. If Antonelli is as good as we think he is, the last time this kind of thing happened was Lewis in at McLaren. Everyone said it's too soon, he's not experienced enough. And he was in an era of unlimited testing, admittedly. He got a lot of practice.
That is Will Buxton anticipating where I was going.
I saw your eyes light up. You know, he was a phenomenon. He did a brilliant job. He matched Fernando Alonso in their rookie season together. And has gone on to be the driver that we know he is. I would love, and Toto has said we may take a bold decision on our drivers.
Yes.
Honestly, I would love it.
You've got to go bold. If Antonelli wins F2, looks an absolute superstar, your Mercedes, go bold.
Do it.
Take the punt, put a superstar in the right seat, and then if 2025 starts off a bit slow, we know that the expectation is not that he's going to come in and beat Russell and be a champion, but he's at least bedded in with Mercedes. The pressure will not be, there will be scrutiny, there always is, but it's not going to be through the roof in the early races. But then you're there, you've got a season under your belt, 2026, new regs, you're ready to hit it hard off the top. And I think team principals are too cautious with their driver signings. There's no rookies on the grid now. I think everyone is so stable and wants to keep a safe pair of hands behind the wheel. When you have a potential star, it's very rare that they don't end up being a star.
We'll pick that up in a second. You might have been seeing Esteban Ocon going slowly. He did say on the team radio there was an issue with the power unit. It appears to have righted itself. He's going to go for another push lap. Will?
Yeah, Alpine are obviously already stating over the winter that the major thing that they're going to be contending with this year is their power unit. Of course, under an engine freeze, no major changes you can make to it other than full reliability, and we always know that is a means by which you can also improve performance, even though you shouldn't. But yes, Alpine stating that their power unit is still their major concern. Now, listen, I would love to see Antonelli get the chance. I would love to see him get in. I would love to see him shake it up, as Jolyon says. Take a chance on somebody who's got all this potential, because we roll back 18 years. So Kimi Räikkönen leaves McLaren and goes to Ferrari, right? Who are we going to replace Kimi with? You know what? We'll stick our rookie, our guy who we've backed the entire way through Junior Formula. We'll stick him in the car because we believe in him. And what happened? Lewis and Fernando fought Kimi for the title, missed out by a point. How fitting, 18 years later, that an 18-year-old named for Räikkönen should replace the driver leaving the silver car for the Scuderia. Comes in, fights for the championship. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay, and the other thing here is Hamilton is off, so they have a vacant seat. So it's not like they can extend a veteran's career by another year and dangle the carrot to Antonelli if he's good enough, and give Lewis, which they ironically did, an option to leave after 1 year.
This is it.
But the same thing was true with Fernando Alonso at Alpine, and they didn't want to sign him up for too long in case they had Piastri on their books. They ended up losing both of them, and that's already happened to Mercedes. So they've got to replace Lewis with someone, and who's going to want to jump in necessarily
for a year?
Yeah. You've got to come in and convincingly beat George Russell at that point, which is going to be no easy feat in the Mercedes car, and he's obviously a very talented driver. So who's going to want to do that? Give up where they're at, probably on a lucrative contract if you're in that sort of position as well, to know that you've got a superstar waiting in the wings.
And you give Antonelli 25. You give Antonelli a year in 25 to bed himself in, because new car regs, new start for 2026. He's embedded with the team. What are you going to do? You put him in Williams for a year and then you stick him in at Mercedes with a brand new car, brand new regs, and expect... No, get him in early. Get him to find his feet. Get him into the right place, and then launch him into 2026 and gun for the World Championship with the new regulations. And as Jolyon said, the fact that they weren't willing to give Lewis a 3-year deal, the fact they gave him a 1+1 because they knew they had Antonelli. They already made their mind up, and that's what opened the door, and that's what allowed Lewis out. So, you know what? You made your own bed. Lie in it. Stick him in the car.
I would say my counterpoint would be Stoffel Vandoorne.
I knew you'd bring in Stoffel at this point. I raised the question, didn't I?
And Stoffel Vandoorne was phenomenal in the second tier. This is a guy who was out-qualifying Fernando Alonso at certain points. Circuits where Alonso had taken pole positions in the past. Huge amount of raw talent, huge amount of promise. You'll notice that he's not in our grid. The only way you can stop Antonelli being a superstar is by rushing him to the top, in my opinion.
I don't think they rushed Stoffel in. Stoffel was ready.
But Stoffel did not get the ideal circumstances.
Exactly.
And Stoffel suddenly found himself out of a championship he shouldn't be.
Stoffel isn't Antonelli, though. You can't say that what happened to one will happen to another.
I think it's a cautionary tale.
And the McLaren was a middling to back-end team.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, when Stoffel was driving, sometimes he was at the back of the grid and Fernando was doing well to make Q2. So that is your case of putting someone not at the front, and it didn't quite work out for Stoffel. But of course, the profile of McLaren and having a teammate like Fernando.
Can I tell you what I think Toto's doing? I think he's driving the price down of who he's actually going to put in the car for 2025.
Let's put this out there. Toro Rosso, Alpha Tauri, RB, whatever you want to call them. You get the drivers in there, you train them up for a few years, then you stick them up at Red Bull. There's no guarantee they are going to fare well against Verstappen. Putting a driver into a junior team to bed them in is no guarantee that when they get their big shot, they're going to make it either. So if you believe in them, don't waste your time. Just stick them in.
Also, guys, Antonelli's not turned a wheel in anger in a Formula 2 car yet. He did testing last
Doesn't
winter.
matter, mate. He's the chosen one.
Let's wait and see if he actually ends up romping the title, because that's a tough enough ask for him in the first.
You can see every Formula 2 race live where you're currently watching this.
Well, it's actually going to be fascinating, Formula 2 this year. We are going to have a Formula 1 driver from Formula 2 next year, because
Guaranteed.
Antonelli is going to be he's going to be teammates with Ollie Behrman, who jumped in this car last year, the Haas.
Was great.
Looked super talented, and that's the Prema lineup. Is a power team for those guys.
That used to be their actual name.
I know. It did. Prema power team. They're back to their roots with surely 2 future F1 stars, given all the hype. But that's a tough benchmark for Antonelli as well. So jumping into F2 with no F3, and you get limited testing in that as well. If he wins it, I mean, that is some talent to come in and do that.
And he already has the super license points.
Ah, the super license points. Made famous by Logan Sargent and his fun to get into Formula 1 a few years ago. All right, well, we are wrapping up our stint in the commentary box. Got a bit lively there at the end. We don't usually get into that heated debate. It's pretty sad when I'm the voice of reason, it really is. When the romantic
about Formula 2 drivers as well.
I know.
No,
We'll have a couple of graduates,
you know what?
Sure.
Steady Eddie, Alex Jakes, that was. You need a more punch in a Formula 1 team.
Absolutely.
There we go.
So who just quickly before you sign off?
Yeah, go on.
Who are you thinking?
Thank you for this. Former Formula 1 driver Julian Palmer, voice of Drive to Survive Will Bucks, and I'm glad I'm answering the questions on day one here. This is terrific.
Who are you thinking is going to go to Mercedes then?
I'd take Fernando.
Get out.
I'd take Fernando Alonso.
You think Mercedes are going to employ Fernando?
On a 1 year?
Fernando's never going to go for a year.
Fernando is here for that chance. Fernando is here to win races and to try and get that elusive 3rd championship of the world. He's been waiting for something to come along. He might take 1 year.
Roll it back, and again, roll it back now 17 years.
Will's still in the paddock, by the way.
07.
At this point.
07. Has enough time passed, has enough water gone under the bridge for Mercedes at board level to have forgiven him?
I reckon so.
Okay.
You need a big presence, whether it be a hotshot, young Italian. By the way, Italy, get excited about Antonelli. He is your greatest driving prospect.
Since Giorgio Pantano.
Oh, here we go. Right, we'll pick that up later on.
Hour and a half in, first Pantano mentioned. Let's go. Testing.
Alex Albon is currently a second off, a reminder that time's not hugely relevant at the start of testing. They will be by the end, though. We've had 16 laps for Charles Leclerc. We've had 26 laps for Fernando Alonso. Bottas has done 22. Albon, you're looking at right now, has done 20. It has been 25 for Yuki Tsunoda. Kevin Magnussen has done 23. The world champion, Max Verstappen, has done 23. George Russell finds himself on 19. Ocon's done 23. It's just 9 for Oscar Piastri. Slow start for McLaren, just 9 laps out there. And that is the mileage count as we see Esteban Ocon getting out of the car.
Well, he's been in a good while. Probably needs to go and calm himself down after a couple of off-track excursions.
That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to make way for the ever-excellent Rachel Brooks, who is taking the lead, Mike, from me.
So Ocon jumping out of the car. Oscar Piastri still with just 9 laps to his name. Back in the garage, as is Max Verstappen. 22 laps on the board. The most of anyone right now is Fernando Alonso, still circulating on 26 laps now for Aston Martin. The lap count creeping up. It's been a very reliable start to the day so far. Piastri just with 9, but no obvious sign of a problem for McLaren in the pit lane. They seem to be running through their program methodically, unpanicked. Hello, Rachel Brooks. How are you?
Hi, Jolene. How are you?
Very good. Enjoying the first hour and a half of the coverage. We see plenty of cars on track. There's some nice stories going on. How are you finding it so far?
It's been good. I actually was sitting in here for that Antonelli discussion, and I agree. I think I would say yes, give Antonelli a chance, and also I would say possibly hang on till 2026 and get Fernando in for a year.
Are your team Alex J?
I am. I'm a combination of the two. I'm a combination of all three of you almost. Scary thought. But yes, I said this at the time. I said this when we heard the news, and I was standing outside Mercedes HQ in Brackley. And I was asked, and I said, you know, there is so much talk about Antonelli. Everybody's so excited about Antonelli right now. It's an awful lot of pressure to put on him. Let's see how he gets on in his first year. But this is the man I think could be sitting in the Mercedes in 2025.
You go calling it early.
Calling it early. Look, he's just gone fastest. That's it. Season done.
Well, the thing is, Aston Martin could yet be ahead of Mercedes. Let's not forget this time last year, Fernando might have not wanted to be in the Mercedes from where he was. New cars, new hopes for both teams. I think Mercedes particularly have probably got a bigger chance to move up the grid with their a bigger revamp of their car from last year to this year. And of course, Aston Martin got a little bit lost towards the end of last season, which doesn't give you a huge amount of hope. But so far, they've looked good on track. Fernando's flying. Maybe he doesn't want to go to Mercedes even.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think we always talk about you can't read anything into testing, but we did read last year that Aston Martin were quick and were going to be good at the first race. I don't want to say anyone had a bet on it. They might have done, they might not have done, but they were quick at the first race. So much as we say we can't, you can read, Will was talking about it earlier, body language, so important to read the body language of people and see who looks happy, who doesn't look happy. And laps on the board, you mentioned it as I joined you, McLaren, laps on the board count at testing and only 9 for them so far.
The interesting thing with McLaren is they weren't rushing to get out on the green light. Mercedes were the first car out there with 4 minutes left on the clock. Mercedes, George Russell was trundling down, trying to make the statement, we're ready, we're going to start 2024, get as much as we can in. McLaren waited 5 minutes, and then Oscar's had a very steady start, but it seems to be methodical, which is encouraging compared to a couple of years ago. They were really struggling with brake cooling and could barely get laps on the board. We haven't seen that level of work for them just yet. Let's see what Verstappen can do on a set of C3 tyres. So this is now medium tyres for Verstappen, which is more akin to what we've seen from Alonso, Leclerc, Bottas on the top order. The cars look very undrivable so far on the harder compounds. So let's see what Max can do coming through the first sector here with a bit more grip in theory underneath.
It's an interesting track, this one, for the teams to compare on, isn't it? Because there's such high degradation around here. You can't do 2 comparative runs back to back without changing and sticking a new set of tyres on, because they'll come in so worn from that first run.
It makes it very hard as a testing circuit because the degradation, like you say, is very high, particularly the rear axle. Max sliding around as he was earlier on would put a lot of energy through the rear tyres as well, so you don't get the chance to do multiple laps. 5.5 kilometres here, 1 minute 33.3 we're down to with Fernando. 1 minute 32.8 was the quickest on day 1 last year, so we're going to pass that, maybe even in the morning session, which shows the development of 1 full year. This is looking much better for Verstappen, as you'd expect on a softer, grippier tyre. He's on the medium, effectively, the C3, sweeps around the slow but still moving and circulating Fernando Alonso, and there we go, purple sector for the Red Bull.
Yeah, well, we were waiting to see, weren't we, just how much of that car we saw launched last week would actually appear on track today from Red Bull. And those images of Adrian Newey when he's looking really closely at cars on the grid, there was a photo went round as a meme when this was launched from last year of him looking at the Mercedes with the no side pod, 0 side pods, whatever you want to call it, and people had put a caption under it saying, I can fix her, and it's almost come to fruition.
It's taken a long time for someone to take a gamble in that direction, but Red Bull have done that, and Verstappen hits the top of the times for the first time in 2024 then, and that crucially looked so much more compliant, looked so much better. No big corrections at the wheel for Max there, even through. This is the tricky double left-hander, turns 9 and 10, no lock-up. and that looked much more stable. So that's what you want to see from a car earlier on. There is a little correction actually as he's getting out towards the curb, trying to put down the right foot, the accelerator. But Verstappen then looking much more comfortable in that car now.
And comfortable in the pit lane is Laura. Laura, what have you got for us?
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. It's very good to be back in a Formula One pit lane, I can tell you that for sure. I am in front of the garage of the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. A tricky 2023, of course, for Alpine. The departure of Otmar Zafnauer, the departure of Alan Permain. Bruno Famin named in the winter break at the launch as the new team principal. He's officially within that role now. Previously, of course, an interim as they just navigated the ups and downs of 2023. Both drivers out of contract for this year. Esteban Ocon indeed out of the car at the moment. You can see the blue Flowbiz all over the black carbon fibre of this A524. In the launch, very much saying the A523 was a car that had plateaued. And so what you are seeing here is that only the steering wheel has survived of that car. This is pretty much a brand new car. I have to say, we've been stood here for 5-10 minutes or so, and there has been an awful lot of work going on around this car. I mean, as you would expect in testing, with setup changes being done throughout, run programs to be had. But a lot of work done here to the front suspension of the car, around the nose as well. And they were earlier taking photos, shining torches to the floor edge and the underneath of the car as well. Worth noting, the PU installation for this Alpine has been optimised and enhanced. Not too much else they could do with a power unit, of course, but it was a sticking point for them in 2023, that power unit. The Alpine often feeling they were down on power. This is currently the scene at the Alpine garage. Sam Collins in the studio with these pictures that Alex on camera here is getting for you. A lot of work going on. Body language seems, I would say, well, not urgent necessarily, but hurried perhaps to get this car back out and get Esteban Ocon clocking up some more laps and a run programme to get through.
Well, it looks to me like one of the drivers, it looks like Ocon has biffed the curb, and that's why the mechanics are working on the underside of the floor, the bit we can't really see quite hard. Nice view of the front suspension, the inboard front suspension on that Alpine, and you can see that they've got a pushrod front suspension layout, that central element, the third element it's sometimes referred to. But for me, the biggest change on this Alpine is something at the moment that we can't really see, and it's to do with the layout of the exhaust pipes. Now, exhaust pipes on a Formula One car on the V6 engine are a little bit like tuning an old musical instrument, a sort of bit of brass band work, if you like, just to get the notes right. And what they've done with that exhaust tailpipe and actually the manifold, where all those sort of worm-like bits of spaghetti exhaust feed up to that tailpipe, they found on the old car that they were losing too much power to the MGU-H, the motor generator unit H. That's what recovers the exhaust gas kinetic energy and turns it into battery energy that you can use to make the car go faster down the track, because of course these are all hybrid cars. And they were finding something that Mercedes discovered back in 2014, that if you don't get the exhaust tuning just right, you can't recover enough exhaust energy out of the car and you lose power overall. So that's one of the biggest changes to the Alpine. Just a very neat detail that they've upgraded since the launch there. Look at the leading edge of the side pod duct there with that little drop down. That's something we haven't seen before, Rachel. And Alpine already developing the car. That's fascinating, that actually.
Sam, actually, if you can hang on for a second, I just wanted to ask you something, because Matt Harmon said at the launch that Alpine have pretty much changed everything bar the steering wheel on this car this season. They seem to have gone back to sort of a base level where they have a lot of avenues they can go down with this car development-wise, which it seems to be a running theory throughout several teams on the grid.
It absolutely is, because we've got some pretty stable regulations expected into next season. I know it sounds pre-season testing 2024, and I'm talking about 2025 car design here, but this is actually a really crucial time for all of the teams. With a major rule change coming in 2026, you really don't want to get your car concept wrong and have to go and engineer a completely new concept from scratch, because you're going to have to lose a load of time when you really need to be developing a completely different concept of car. Right now, all the teams are banned from developing their 2026 cars, so all the work that goes into these cars needs to carry through to 2025. And some of those comments you refer to, Rachel, that Matt Harmon made me suspect that this team, Alpine, may be plotting to carry at least the chassis and car concept over of this Alpine over into next season, which the team used to do an awful lot when Jolyon was driving for them with the Renault chassis. They kept their chassis for quite quite a few seasons, I think. One managed to last three different championships.
Great, thank you, Sam. Jolien, go on. Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, that was not when we had the Lotus chassis of 2015 became pretty much the Renault chassis of 2016, but then it was the year after that. There's a major rule change, so there was no chassis carryover at that point. So it must have been, I guess, before my time at Renault. But Alpine are they're another team that have been pretty downbeat with the launch with this concept change, and it's clearly a bit of a new direction for them. And both drivers sort of saying, well, let's manage expectations at the start of the year. So they are obviously not particularly happy with the numbers that they've seen in the wind tunnel or at base, and then the CFD data they've got, the simulator driving as well. And this is like for like with what they had last year, so you would hope that there's going to be progression, because of course everyone in the field should be making some good progress with a blank canvas to try and right your wrongs of 2023. But Alpine have started the year thinking we're not where we want to be, but crucially with the concept change they've given themselves more wriggle room to add performance to the car. So that is the long-term goal, I think, there. And potentially the drivers have got to be a little bit patient to exploit that. And maybe it'll come quickly. Maybe there'll be some more development in the pipeline that should take months, as we saw last year with McLaren.
The patience is a key word, I think, because I got the impression from several teams up and down the screen, maybe even almost half of the teams, saying that they know they are not going to be competitive at the start of the season because they have given themselves an opportunity to develop this car in so many different directions, which is maybe something they didn't do last year, which is why a lot of them struggled to try and catch up.
Yeah, it's a common theme, really. A lot of the teams, Sauber's another one that have changed concept, and they're going to be building it up. Actually, Bottas in the car so far has had a decent morning, getting a lot of running in at least. But they are another team that are setting not so lofty expectations with the change of concept, and a lot of that is moving towards the Red Bull design that we saw from last year and the year before, really, where Red Bull have just had iterations of their previous concept, really. And everyone's now moved towards that. They've seen that it's dominated so well last season.
Except Red Bull, who got away.
Except Red Bull, who got away, and that's the irony of it all. They've all gone towards what was a world beater last year, and Red Bull have thought, well, hang on, you guys all do that, and we're going to try this one. So they're in their own voyage of discovery, really, Red Bull, with their latest design.
It is going to be fascinating, isn't it, to see if this hits this Red Bull. I mean, I remember being here last year and everyone was saying Mercedes might not have side pods, when we were waiting to see it, weren't we? And it was the anticipation of, has somebody come up with a genius idea? And obviously that didn't work, and they put side pods back on the car, essentially, and now we've got this. The moment of possibly that tiny crumb of, or huge crumb of ingenuity from a designer, is the anticipation's fantastic.
It's quite exciting to see in pre-season when you see someone, especially one of the big teams, go off and do something different to everyone else. And I remember the Mercedes, it was 2 years ago now that they had the zero pod unveiled, and you're just looking at it. And this was Mercedes on the back of a dominant run, just missing out in 21, but they were Constructors' champions and having such a dominant run. And then they unveil this zero pod concept, and you were like, wow, that is alien, but probably incredible. But it wasn't, of course. And that's the thing, when you go out on your own on something innovative, you open yourself up to something that can be tricky. What I would say is the Mercedes, it looked difficult straight away on the circuit in 2022. It looked difficult last year when they tried to, they kept with the concept, but they tried to tweak it and maximize it. And watching it out on circuit, watching it on the screens, you could tell that the car looked quite spiky and difficult. It's very early to say on the Red Bull right now, and certainly on the harder tyres earlier on. I mean, probably irrelevant to say because the grip level was just not there. But when Max just bolted on a set of C3s, at least the car's, the base, looked compliant, and that's what we didn't really see from the Mercedes early days. So, needless to say, I think there's probably more encouragement for Red Bull at this stage than the jeopardy that Mercedes had, but you never know.
I think Max said it's not a conservative car. They've been quite bold and quite aggressive, which is what we want to see, isn't it? I mean, we're coming into these last 2 years of regulations where other teams tend to catch up anyway, and it gets a lot tighter towards the end of it, but you always want to see people being bold with the design.
You know what the biggest surprise for me is? That you want to see people being bold. It's quite fun at pre-season testing when the cars look the same. We want to see a tight field, so maybe if they all look the same, they go the same, and that'll be a really close field, and that's quite fun through the season. But when someone doesn't, it does make testing more interesting to see if something is a hit or a miss. What you don't expect is the team that has dominated, not just won the championship, but thrashed everyone, to be the team that's taking the risk. They should be in the safe spot. But the fact that they've gone for it with presumably quite a lot of development time, given they had such a dominant year last year, they had enough time to switch early, it smacks of confidence to me. You never know if it's going to work until it hits the track, but the bold approach for a team like Red Bull to switch away from that, it really does smack of confidence.
To call it a weakness is maybe overemphasizing, but if they had a weakness, it was the slow corners, wasn't it? You look at Monaco, you look at Singapore, for them trying to combat that. We saw AlphaTauri bring a new floor right at the end of the season to Abu Dhabi that seemed to be working. Can they take reference from that to help them this year with the one area where they slightly fell down last year?
I mean, possibly AlphaTauri actually a good slow speed performance at the end of last year. I think back to Mexico as well, where they were absolutely flying. I'd be surprised if there's too much going the other way from the RBs to Red Bull. I think the RBs will be taking as much as they can from Red Bull. Maybe a concept idea, you know, could be floated around in the paddock, but everyone is looking at everyone else already. So even day one morning of testing, there's going to be so many typically spy photographers out there getting all the shots they possibly can of all the cars. You can then see roughly where a car's strength and weakness lies. And I think Red Bull have got enough confidence in themselves probably to just look introspectively right now.
What have you made of Ferrari? We're on board with Charles Leclerc at the moment. He's gone quickest in Sector 1. Oh, not quite through there.
Screechy down at turn 8 for Charles Leclerc. So this is a C3, the medium compound again, and you can see immediately flat spot on the front right. So Leclerc had done an outlap, was winding it up for an attack there, and did the fastest first sector of anyone, and then just could not stop the car down for turn 8. There's a little bit of a tailwind there as well, stopping the drivers from decelerating quite as quickly as they like. It's a tricky downhill braking zone. And this will end the lap. He already got a little bit squirmy coming out of turn 6. And then big lock-up, braking and turning as well. And he's not the first driver to struggle to slow the car down there. But Charles, yeah, you can see just turning slightly in as well, unloading that inside front, not helping himself with the deceleration there. And the flat spot you can see on that front right there as it goes around might limit that set of tyres.
Every area of this car has been redesigned according to Enrico Cardile at the launch, and they said they focused as well on trying to reduce Red Bull's DRS advantage. They've got a revised DRS on this.
Red Bull's DRS was such a
incredible.
It was warp speed, wasn't it, when they did some of their DRS passes early in the season. I remember Melbourne and Max flew past Lewis Hamilton for the lead of the race. And that is a key area of development now. The DRS, it can be worth half a second per lap, typically, with a couple of activation zones, can be even a little bit more. And that's in qualifying. It is a crucial performance area that I think a lot of the teams hadn't really looked into quite, or realised they could be exploited quite as much as Red Bull did earlier on. So that's a key area, not just for Ferrari, but a team like McLaren as well, who had not the most efficient DRS last year. That's one of their key areas of improvement for this season. Ferrari, I think, are quite interesting to watch, as well as Mercedes this year. Mercedes have gone for a new baseline of what they tried to start last year, but they were a bit stuck with the chassis choice they had for the zero.
They were playing catch-up, didn't you, with the design a little bit?
Yeah, and it wasn't a blank canvas that they started with. They wanted the zero pod to still work this time last year, and then they scrabbled around to find a very good bodge to make it work, and found some performance late in the season. But this is a fresh start for Mercedes, so there's hope that they can move forward. Ferrari did a lot of great work at the end of last year, and we saw that with the win for Sainz in Singapore, but particularly the late pace that Charles had. A lot of pole positions, some better race pace as well, understanding the car and optimizing it from the Dutch Grand Prix and then the Japanese Grand Prix, adding a new floor and getting Leclerc much more comfortable to extract the most out of it. And they're moving on from that baseline, and that's the order of the day really for Ferrari, is to try and get the rear settled and predictable, so that Leclerc can add some front and get the car rotating like he likes.
They're trying to get rid of the inconsistencies they had, aren't they? And also, you know, the Saturday car was so much better than the Sunday car, and that's not what you want.
It's always been the case for a long time with Ferrari as well. So a little bit, we spoke about Haas earlier on, trying to understand tyre deg and maximising your tyre use on a qualifying, getting the tyres into the right window, extracting the performance, but then not routing them too soon in a Grand Prix. It's a fine line, and this man was superb last year and it always has been at extracting qualifying performance, but not so much in the race where, you know, we all know his famed poles to wins ratio, which is still going. But he did improve on the last lap as well, and riding on board, we still see the flat spot. So be a little bit more to come from Charles still.
Well, Max does still top the times, though. Charles just slotting in behind him, and Laura is down in the pit lane for us at Williams, I think, Laura.
Yes, I am indeed. I headed up here. I did hear that Alex Albon earlier on had a smoking front right brake disc. Hearing that was no issue at all, but he is having some problems with the DRS within this FW46. He is in the car now, though. There isn't too much of an urgency around what the Williams mechanics are doing. It looks like he's going to be heading back out relatively soon. Much of the off-season winter work into this FW46 is making the car more drivable, giving the drivers a greater window for performance. And indeed also the display on the steering wheel has changed from the chassis to actually now within the steering wheel itself. Much hope, much optimism around Williams racing. Alex Albon, of course, and Logan Sargent. We'll see him a bit later on. He, of course, has said he's put on 5 kilos over the winter, mostly in muscle. He said he felt light and generally quite unhealthy towards the end of last season, but has bulked over the winter, had a very good refresh, and it'll be interesting to see him out on track a bit later on today. For now, though, Alex Albon within that FW46 for Williams. Issues with the DRS, I'll try and find out if they've been resolved or not. A little minor change for the display on the steering wheel as well. I am also hearing, I just heard, there is a very quirky, fun change to the Mercedes steering wheel as well. So I'm going to head down there and see what I can see and let you guys know about it.
Great. I'm intrigued now as to what that might be. I should let you know we've got Pat Fry and James Vowles coming up a little later on today, and we'll hear from the drivers as well across the 3 days and hear from them. And I was going to ask you actually, Jolien, because Williams are one of 4 teams that were doing a day here yesterday and running their cars in the filming days that they're allowed, the small amount of distance they're allowed, the 100k. They were one of the teams, McLaren, Mercedes, and there was one other as well were here yesterday. Doing a filming day. How much advantage is that to be able to get in here early? Everyone is allowed to do these filming days, of course. It just depends where and when you do them.
Well, the thing for Williams is that it was actually the first time they had the car on track, and so it's an advantage definitely to run a filming day before you turn up for testing. You can troubleshoot any problems. You can get a little bit of a read, and we see typically so many aero cruises where drivers are just going at a steady speed down a straight with an aero rake on, and just gathering data, and you can do that with a filming day. Just find something, crunch some numbers, give the design team, the engineers, some data to look through before you turn up for the official test. And I guess it's a chance for the drivers to dust off the cobwebs a little bit, feel the speed after a couple of months out. It's been a short winter. Feels like it's been a short winter as well.
Yeah, it has.
Back in the fray, but it's the same for the drivers. You know, it's someone like Logan who wasn't feeling his best last year. Has added 5 kilos is a lot to gain in the 5 kilos of muscle. That's some gym time.
5 kilos is a lot. It's a lot of muscle.
And it's heat exhaustion, but when your body's already struggling, maybe then the heat takes it over the top. And it was obviously not just Logan that struggled, but he did retire from that one. But it's interesting to see his mindset this year. No longer the rookie. He's going to have to up his game and get closer to Albon, but obviously he's had a decent, productive winter.
He does indeed. What was it like that first day back in the car after the winter? What was it like? What was the worst thing that night when you were trying to sleep? Was it the aching neck? Was it, what is it?
Well, I didn't have too many really reliable days when I first got in the car, so physically I was always in decent shape, I think. I did, it was Barcelona, which was a more physical circuit than Bahrain. But I think the most laps I would have done in a day one of Barcelona must have been about 80 laps on a good day. And that it just shows how testing's come on. Last year, Max did 160 laps on day one of testing. And yeah, your neck would take the brunt.
Straight to the physio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A nice rub down at the end of the day. Make sure that you're loose, because sometimes you'll be back in the car the next day as well. it comes really thick and fast, and you can't afford to not be on top of your game when you only get a day and a half in the car before the season. But yeah, the reliability has come on so much that well, big snap from Albon once again in the Williams. They could do 3 race distances today, and so you've got to be fit enough to do that. It's difficult to replicate the strain of a Formula 1 car in the gym, but it's your neck and your core muscles that are the classic ones.
Williams haven't suddenly taken on an orange sponsor. That's some Flowbiz paint on the back of that Williams right now as Alex takes it round. What did you prefer? Did you prefer doing a morning and then having the afternoon off and then back in the next day? Did you want to do a whole full day in one go? What did you prefer?
I was pretty easy going on it, actually. There's benefits to both. So today we've got only Max and George Russell in the cars for the whole day. Everyone else has split it, and that is keeping a bit of freshness of the drivers as well, because if you're doing 3 race distances, it can take its toll on you a little bit. It allows both drivers to get a feel on the car on each day if there's upgrades coming as well. So there's benefits to that. But then you've got you potentially lose a bit of time around lunch, changing pedal settings and seat and some technical changes on the car basically to accommodate the other driver. So I was pretty easy going. I was an easy-going driver, Rachel.
You're very easy to interview as well. Always a pleasure.
I don't think everyone said that.
Actually, Laura was down at Williams, wasn't she? They were looking at that DRS, so he's just opened it there. And I wonder if that's, well, looks like it is the reason why they've got the Flowbiz paint. They're just checking the back of that Williams.
They had the Flowbiz on the nose a while ago, so I think they are running through a typical Flowbiz run plan. This is Albon, so he's fighting the car already coming into to turn 4, a little bit wide coming out of it over track limits, no problemo in pre-season, and then it was the snap here on the exit at turn 4. It didn't look so drastic when we jumped on board with him, but there we go, just fighting the rear of the car still, but exploring a bit of the scenery around this circuit as well, and that is on the harder tyre as well then for Albon, the C2. And he's already run the softer compound, the C4. So it's always easier to add grip, and when you take it away again, suddenly the car feels not so great. And Albon fighting it, but catching it nicely.
I'm always intrigued to see who is in the car at the end of the last day of testing. I always wonder how teams choose whether drivers have much input in it, because I would imagine you want to be the last person to drive that car before the race.
Oh yeah. Right. So that's roughly how you know who's the preferred driver, is who's driving the car.
That's what I was wondering. Is that number
play.
1 in the team who's in the car on the Friday afternoon or whatever it is?
Oh yeah, that's the one. So if you're, especially somewhere like here, because it's going to be into the twilight and then the night time, the track will be at its best, the car will be in its final configuration, and you want to be the one driving it in basically what could be a qualifying mode at that point. So the mornings are a little bit hotter, the track's not as good, it could be sandier, dustier as well from the night before. You want to be in that car, and I think most of the drivers have been fighting for it. It just depends on the team really. They've got the final say in how it works. I remember when Nico Hulkenberg joined the team, suddenly it was like, right, you're getting mornings, Nico's getting the final day. I was thinking, oh no, this is where we're at, is it? Yeah, no second driver clause, but there's a few things that sneak in, and you can tell who's the preferred driver in the teams usually by something like that.
On board with Charles again, who, as you say, in that last run actually did manage to get the lap out of it despite the flat spot on the tyres, so we're expecting to see some more time come from this Ferrari.
So they're all the Red Bull, Charles Leclerc here in the Ferrari, and Fernando Alonso did that time earlier on, all just 3/10 apart, all on the same tyre. We have no idea about engine modes and fuel, and it's very difficult to read into the testing times. But they've all been on the same tyre, sitting around a similar lap time. And Leclerc's thrown a few sets of this medium tyre at it, and he looks like he's done some level of performance style running in terms of a very slow outlap when Ant was out there at turn 2. He was crawling past, coming out of the pits, really trying to prepare the tyres, and that signals that he wants to get perfect for the first lap and maximise it, as is the way that he's been driving. Let's have a look at this replay down towards turn 8. And I think that's a different lock-up then for Charles. Same corner, still getting out to that curb on the entry. We'll see that here. Car bouncing quite a lot there as well. Gets out to that curb, he's slightly braking and turning, and look, this car looks so stiff suddenly. So I think they've made a suspension change Car bouncing, looks really uncompliant, and Charles struggling with a little bit of locking.
Okay, well, while we have a closer look at this, Laura is down at Mercedes. Laura.
I teased you earlier on, didn't I? With
You did, the steering
quirky,
wheel.
fun change to the steering wheel, exactly. I'd hope to show you at least a visual representation of the car, and you can all imagine the steering wheel in there. Unfortunately, as I came down to the garages here, we do have the barriers in place, suggesting that perhaps more than a small setup change is taking place within the garage. I then asked very nicely, and the lovely Adam McDade at Mercedes, who sent across the message about the steering wheel change, very kindly complied. I have the steering wheel in my hand. And what you can see here, for the drivers to now communicate with the team, they will press the WhatsApp button. Perhaps the smallest branding in all of world sport, certainly in Formula One, but a very fun way for Mercedes to demonstrate their partnership with WhatsApp. That is the button that the Mercedes drivers will be pressing to communicate with the team. Of course, it's on WhatsApp.
Brilliant stuff, Laura. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jolyon, who is popping out, but will be back with us a little later on as Charles is wheeled back into the garage now. We have a look. Second on the times then with a 1:33.2 behind Max Verstappen with a 1:33.0. Fernando Alonso there third quickest so far with a 1:33.3. Temperature is ramping up outside. Its track temperature is now 38.2 with an air temperature of 24 degrees as Anthony Davidson seeks the air conditioning of this commentary box from being outside.
Hello. Yeah, it's much nicer in here. And I mean, it's more fun being out on track, that's for sure, watching the cars real time. And like I said, at the time, it was really good to be able to see the details up close, whereas the car is moving around and the driver really fighting it. But no, I'm not going to lie. It's a bit cooler in here, but it is nice to see the sunshine again. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, one of my highlights though from testing is going out trackside with you, and when you watch the cars and you can see how difficult some of them are to handle, you can see how easy some of them are, how compliant they are out on track, and just having you talk through what we're seeing with our eyes is always one of the highlights of testing. You must still enjoy actually watching them, or is it hard not being in it?
No, I do. I love watching it, actually. I mean, there's very little desire, actually, thankfully, from my side to get into the cars, because I know I wouldn't do them justice anymore. So it's, we're trained athletes to be at your best and to get the best out of the car at all times. And as soon as you step away for too long, then and Formula One just keeps evolving all the time. If you jumped in, you wouldn't do the machinery justice anyway. So that you lack that desire therefore to get in, as we see that lock up from Bottas into turn one. This is what I was talking about when I was down there. You see here just the inside wheel grabs. It's a bit bumpy there as well. One of the bumpier circuits that we go to these days, thanks to the older surface that we're on. And actually, there's the tunnel that you drive into the circuit through, and that leads under that section where Bottas, and that's why you get those bumps. The sinkage of the track surface creates the bumps, and yes, that's where you need a good ride quality from the car. If you haven't, combined with braking too late, obviously, as well, it can just grab the inside front wheel often into that one, and it ruins your apex straight away. You run wide, and then that messes up in turn two that follows on from there. And I really like the way those two corners link together.
You mentioned no desire to get back in a car right now, but you have been in the Mercedes sim, and there was a quote from Toto Wolff that in fact...
On just letting a car by? No?
Yes, he was, yeah.
Oh, and yeah, that's actually...
There was a lock-up from Alex Albon as he went
That's
past.
actually, from Albon's point of view, yeah, that's great. We've got this on board now. So you'll see what a distraction it is for him. You're not sure what that car's going to do, and that momentary lapse in concentration is the end result there. That's not just the case of him. It's not a coincidence, basically, is what I was trying to say.
It was kind of a perfect storm.
It is. It's just, we hear quite often the drivers saying on the radio to their engineer, don't talk to me in the corners. It's because it's that little distraction is enough to cause an error like this. And yeah, ultimately it is Albon's fault that he ran wide, but there's a reason behind it. It is that your eye just wanders to the car on the left-hand side instead of looking where you're braking and where you're taking your car, and at that moment You've gone in a bit too quick. You veer offline slightly. You maybe turn a bit too much and unload the inside wheel too much. That locks up. And a bit like turn 1, I was saying before, you then start to run wide.
So which of the cars you saw on track earlier then has impressed you the most, or looks the easiest to handle and has the most potential?
Well, only in the slow speeds, where we are with Ocon right now in the higher speed content at the track. There's no real high-speed corners here, more medium speed. And that's really predominantly Sector 3. So you've got 6 and 7, of course, where you can see one of the McLarens going through now, the top right-hand of the screen and the graphics. And then things start to speed up once you get to turn 11, 12, 13. So where I was in turn 1, there's actually, a very slow speed part of the track that we're coming into now, and you'll see just after the curve on the left-hand side comes out. He's braked it early on this particular lap, but that's your usual braking point just as the curve comes at you, and then you've got to slow it right down at the apex, and you're scrubbing off a huge amount of speed from travelling at, 185 miles an hour down to around 50 miles an hour at the apex, and that's all done within about 100, 120 metres. Pretty impressive stuff. So where I was standing, sorry, to answer your first question, for me, the Aston Martin looked pretty good in that particular part of the track. It was well poised on the braking. It looked easy to tuck into the apex where you need it. The rear looked pretty good when they tried to get on power early on, and then as you build up the speed through turn 2, the rear was still nicely settled. That's what you're looking for. The Red Bull looked a bit of a handful in the very slow speed part with the rear sliding too much. The braking was okay, but then as you build up speed through turn 2, the car looked, for me, it looked the best. But it also looked very heavy. You see it's lethargic in its change of direction.
I just wanted to pick up on this McLaren and why you would just have flowbiz on one side of the rear wing. Why would you have the flowbiz just on one half of the car there?
Well, I think you'd need to ask an aerodynamicist, maybe they're just trying to save paint.
Well, you imagine both cars of the sides of the car are exactly the same. So I'm wondering what they're measuring on that side of the car in particular. Sam, I wonder if Sam's got any ideas on that for us. Sam, why would they be putting it just on that one half of the car?
The answer's pretty simple, actually, because generally speaking, the cars are roughly symmetrical. Some of the cooling stuff's a bit different side to side, but generally the overall shape of the car is the same on both sides. So it's a bit pointless putting it on both sides of the car.
So it is saving paint.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
There you go.
Sometimes we try and make things far too complicated, don't we?
All right then, Sam.
Straightforward.
Why on the Williams we see the whole wing painted?
Because they've got more money to spend on paint.
Why would you therefore paint the whole thing then?
I mean, I think they're looking at different experiments. So if you want to look at the Williams, you can see the wing coming towards us. Actually, the whole wing is painted slightly differently across its span. You can see under the MS of the logo, it's a little bit more heavily painted than it is under the W at the start of the logo on the right-hand side of the car. Coming towards us, it's on the left, of course. What I think you're looking at there is the team are doing experiments. It's like when you're doing your physics class in high school and you have to study the scientific method, where you've got to come up with a sort of a suggestion for the experiment, a methodology, then you run the experiment, and then the engineers have to go away and write up a report afterwards to see how that experiment worked out, and then they have a think about how to improve the design of the car. So I suspect you may actually be seeing two completely separate experiments going on the rear wing. But also, because, as I said, the cooling stuff on the car isn't exactly symmetrical side to side, at the rear of the car, you may want to do it right across the span of the rear wing because the hot gases and the stuff coming out the back of the car could be different side to side.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Sam. I mean, I didn't do very well in physics at school, but I do remember method, results and conclusion, wasn't it? That's how we had to do experiments.
It was actually was that the bit of the
I'm
car
not
that
sure,
fell off there, or did it just flick something from the circuit that was already there?
Did they
it was
pick
hard
up
to see from that shot.
What came off? I wanted to ask you, actually, Sam was talking about cooling there. There is something loose on the right rear.
Oh, yeah. Good spot. Did it come from there? Is that just a bit of tape or a bit of carbon flapping around? But, yeah.
I was going to ask you, we had this conversation in the car on the way this morning, in fact, to the track, about cooling, and have Red Bull taken the cooling, the tiny cooling? Do you remember we were talking about it from when Mercedes had the zero pods? They had to have this very special, almost rocket invented for rockets cooling system that was very, very small and could fit in because of these tiny side pods, this cooling device, this cooling mechanism, and have Red Bull been able to adapt that? Because did Mercedes sign an exclusive deal for this?
Well, yeah, as you start to tighten the bodywork around the car, you need to then have smaller radiators, and I guess that becomes the limitation. And but you know, people are fascinated with the side pods on these cars. It's not about the side pods. It's really not about the side pods. It's about the floor. That's where most of your grip comes from. And it's not just about the shape of the floor either. It's how the floor moves around in the turbulence and the airflow that it generates. And around anywhere from 60 to 80% of the car's total grip at 300 kilometers an hour, so 186 miles an hour, comes from the floor.
So are the side pods a distraction where it says, look here, don't look here?
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure the way it interacts with the rear wing and all that, it has some purpose, but the real essence is the floor. And that's the bit we can't see. So the bit we can see are the side pods. So we start to get transfixed by that, the aesthetics of it all. But the cooling is important. Let's see what Red Bull do. If they go to 0 side pods in the future, which we're predicting in their later iterations of their design this year, then it goes to show that the 0 pod concept wasn't such a flop after all. It's just a different solution to cooling.
Well, the floor is, without doubt, I mean, the biggest area of development on these cars, and you try and keep it secret unless you crash in Monaco and your car is craned for the whole world to see and everyone gets to see the underside.
But then it's still secret because nobody knows the different layers of carbon that you're using and the way that the floor can potentially move around as well within all those shapes, the different types of carbon and strengths of carbon that are used within the floor. That's the magic.
Different strength will give you different airflow, will give you different...
Yeah, I guess so. And that's the bit no one, even if you gave a blueprint of the shape, if someone was given, you know, the shape of a floor, it still wouldn't react the same. Because it's how you build the floor as well.
So Sam, I want to bring you in on this because, I mean, we obviously saw the floor of that Red Bull, we saw the floor of the Williams, and we saw the differences between the two last year, and you can see how much that Red Bull floor has been developed. So what other areas are we looking at? Because when the teams talk about it, and they talk about the undercut on the side port, they talk about, you know, what they're trying to achieve with that floor. Can you just expand on that for us?
Well, expansion is one of the things you're going to be looking at, how the floor shape changes, the contours, those little details. But the thing about it, and you hear this all the time, and you were absolutely spot on earlier, Rachel, that, you know, everybody's looking at the side pod. Actually, it's the floor that's the really important bit. But Ant's absolutely spot on as well. You can't look at a Grand Prix car and say this aerodynamic part does this. You don't know unless you've got the CAD model, the actual CAD model, or the wind tunnel model, or even better, the real car, and you can stick some sensors over it. You can't really say for certain what all of those little wobbly bits on the floor are all about. So if someone does go off at Monaco and it gets craned up for us all to take pictures of, you're still doing a lot of guesswork, and what you have to do in that situation is sculpt those little edges, and then you start to see on the top of the floor the undercuts of the side pod. Then you start to learn exactly what you were talking about before, that it's that upper surface of the floor and how it works with the lower surface, how the teams are trying to seal the floor edges, build up on that ground effect, and almost have invisible sliding skirts, get that downforce working, but in such a way that it works all the way around the lap. Because when a car goes around a corner, it's a bit like your road car in a roundabout. It leans over. Even though they're super stiff, there's still a few millimeters of movement, and that's enough to change the airflow under the car. And just managing those little changes of vortexes, the change of the aerodynamic airflow. If you're sitting in the bath just when it's all finished and there's sort of a bit of, that soapiness on the top, doesn't work if you've got bubble bath in, and you run your fingers through it, you can see all those eddy currents behind your finger when you run it through the top of the bath. That's what you're looking at, but in 3 dimensions, and trying to understand that is how you get the most out of the downforce. And that's what the teams are all trying to do with their floors. So just looking at another team's floor, it's not going to be a great help, but it might get the old grey matter going, might get you thinking, and it might get you thinking about what you're doing on the leading edge of the side pod, just underneath those ducts. That's a critical area just to help the rest of the floor work.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Was that solar panels we saw on the Ferrari pit wall just then?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if they were there last year, but if that's a new addition, that's very cool, isn't it?
I mean, weather-wise last year, we had, at the start of the season, anyway, for the first half of the season, an awful lot of rain. But when we do go to these hotter, sunnier places...
Yeah, it might not be very effective in Spa, but in Bahrain, where we are right now, really, really good. Maybe they're just going to store the energy here and take it elsewhere.
Except for during F2 testing when it rained here. But
yeah, doesn't usually last for long. I have seen it rain here before, but yeah, never... It's not like the winter we've had in the UK, just put it that way.
No, you're talking to someone with a roof leak. I know how much it's rained this winter. Right, OK, let's get back to the cars on track then and what we're seeing at the moment, because we've only got 19 laps for George Russell so far, 38 for Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, 38 for Yuki Tsunoda.
Wow,
that's
a big old lock-up. Big old lock-up from Charles. But, and here, you know, it's that bump I'm talking about. Yeah, see, it goes over the bump and it carries on through to the braking zone of one, but he is really trying to lean on the car there, maybe a bit too hard. Looks like he's carrying that flat spot on the right front as well now. That's that tyre probably done. And Albon comes back into 9 and 10 without a car in his way this time, and still suffering with the front left locking up. Now, that's one part of the track where typically the driver, you saw the switch changes on the steering wheel. I saw you were talking about it earlier on, the radio button on the Mercedes. But one of the tools that the driver can play with, of course, is the brake migration tool. And that's just a bit of the paint that's flicked up from the tyre. Yeah, it was a nicely painted surface off track. Not so much anymore. But maybe they give it another lick before race week. But yeah, so the drivers typically into that corner, turn 9, before it tightens into 10, will go rearward on the brake bias, depending on where the wind direction's coming from, just to try and stop that from happening. And the brake migration tool as well, or the saturation tool, whatever the teams call it, they will pretty much do the same thing, and that it does exactly that. It migrates the balance from being predominantly more to the front, then a little bit more to the rear, giving the car a little bit of what it's called a handbrake effect as you turn into the corner. And so it's just one of the many tools that you have. You've got the differential as well, of course, that can help you out in a slower speed corner like that to open it up more, to help rotate the car, pivot the car, I mean by that. And yeah, sometimes you need to go more, just to tune it more as the tyres start to wear more, or if the wind starts to pick up or change direction. And even if you're behind another car and you're in the turbulence that Sam was talking about earlier on, the turbulence can really affect the attitude of the car. And here is that corner, so you're coming in, you're slowing down and turning at the same time, and then you increase the steering angle as you get to turn 10. You're asking a hell of a lot from the car at that point. You've got to be quite careful on the brake pedal as you get deeper into the corner to kind of bleed off a bit of pressure from the brakes, because you daren't have that front locking. If you have rear locking there, you'll spin the car. But it's more often the case that you'll have a bit of front locking because the front becomes unloaded.
It's a good corner to watch, actually, through 9 and 10 is a good place to go and watch on track, actually, to see which cars are the ones that are compliant, which cars are the ones that I remember we watched there, and I think it was the Haas that year that we saw was really struggling every time on that corner, and so it turned out at the start of that season. And
it was, yeah, and we saw the Alfa Romeo back then as well was a pretty sweet handling car at the start of 2022 with its shorter wheelbase, and it really helped it in a corner like that. And it looked like a really much easier car to drive than many. The one thing that really stands out, though, all of the teams have got this porpoising sorted out, haven't they? Do you remember when you look back to 2022?
Yes.
The difference in ride quality. I mean, it's the same set of regulations.
Same bumps on the track.
Same bump. It's the same track. It hasn't changed at all. And my goodness, the cars look so much better over the bumps, but also the grip they have, slow speed and high speed. The cars are so much more stuck to the ground now than ever before with this, still relatively speaking, new set of regulations. That's the progress of Formula One, and that is with the cost cap as well. Imagine where they'd be without it, spending their old 350 million a year on just car development alone. I mean, they were impressive times, but it's remarkable to see that relentless progress that all these teams make year after year.
I mean, it's going to be fascinating once we get on track this weekend in qualifying to see who's made a step up as you get to the end of the regulation.
You'll see less time gain here on this particular circuit compared to other tracks we go to.
So where will we get the first real idea? So we've got Saudi Arabia after this is a street track. We're not really expecting, we won't get a proper idea there. So we're looking at Albert Park, are we looking at Suzuka?
Well, in terms of, you know, I mean, it does have relevance. This circuit does have relevance, but for other circuits you come to later in the year that have slower speed corners. So, yeah, you have to look out for Sector 1 here. Maybe the Ferrari we're looking at on the screen now. Maybe that will be brilliant in the slow speed compared to the Red Bull, say, in qualifying. And then you can decipher whether it will be good at circuits like Monaco or Singapore or other slow speed circuits on the calendar that we come to. And then look at other sectors from the circuit, like Sector 3, a bit higher speed. And then you can deduce, well, okay, maybe Melbourne or Saudi, it'll be good on circuits like that. But yeah, for this track, it's all I'm saying is if you're finding aerodynamic gains from the car, which is what most of them would have found, there's a bit you can do, some trickery to the mechanical side of things in a Formula 1 car. They'd love to have active ride suspension, but the active ride suspension and the suspension today is mostly about trying to energize the aero effects of the car, because that is the key. And even at slow speed, you do have a lot of aerodynamic dominance from the grip. That's why they all run the highest wing angles at the slow speed circuits like Monaco and Singapore. So you're trying to just energize the aero influence of the car at all times. And you even sacrifice some mechanical components and elements of that mechanical balance and grip, say like suspension design, for example. Kinematically, it might not make that much sense to run these cars if they had no wings or ground effects on them at all. You probably wouldn't run the suspension anything like the shapes that they run here. It's because it's all about trying to build the aero advantage. So when you do go to circuits that are higher speed, you'll see naturally, because you get even more aero effect at higher speed, you'll see the lap times from old separate even more.
Okay, just have one quick question for you on the Ferrari. They've got a different rear suspension to the rest of the grid. So they've stuck with the pull rod suspension. Everyone else has gone push rod at the rear. Can you just briefly tell us, or if Sam wants to come in on this, tell us the difference, what they are achieving others aren't, or what they are trying to achieve others?
Well, I mean, of course it will be aerodynamics, but Sam will be able to, no doubt, go into more detailed analysis. Take it away, Sam.
Absolutely right, Anne. It is all about aerodynamics, but there are some mechanical considerations as well. Red Bull, Max Verstappen, you see him sitting in his garage there getting ready to go out for a run. They have a pull rod front suspension, which means the diagonal spindly bit at the front wheel goes downwards from the outside to the middle of the car, because all of the suspension components, the springs and dampers, they're not coil springs, they're torsion bar springs on most cars. They're mounted at the bottom of the car, they're bottom of the chassis. That lowers the centre of gravity height significantly. It's in theory better aerodynamically, according to some teams. Other teams don't agree, of course, and you can see it's just mounted at the bottom of the chassis there. That makes it much, much harder to make suspension adjustments. Mechanically, it's far more complicated. Then you've got layouts like the Williams. Here you can see it with the nose off, which is quite a nice shot. You can see it's a push rod front suspension, so the diagonal bit goes from the low point on the wheel upwards to the chassis, and all of its suspension components are mounted up on the top, underneath that number 23 for Alex Albon. That makes it much easier to work on the car. It's in theory slightly lighter, and it's just a simpler solution. And some teams, Williams clearly one of them, don't believe it's a big aerodynamic disadvantage. So it's a little bit reversed at the rear of the car, because it's a more complicated area of the car, because you've got the gearbox, and the gearbox layout defines the layout of the rear suspension. And actually, not every team makes its own gearbox. So Red Bull, for example, does make its own gearbox, but they also supply that gearbox to the RB team. So the RB team has to use the same layout as Red Bull. Mercedes, they supply gearboxes to Aston Martin, to Williams, and they have to use the Mercedes layout, whichever Mercedes choose. Ferrari, though, the rear of their car, they've decided to go quite a different way to everybody else, and they've stuck with the opposite design to everybody else. They've gone for a pull rod rear suspension, and the Haas have to use that as well. The Kick Sauber team, they make their own gearbox now as they get ready to be turned into Audi, and so they've gone for the same route as everybody else, including Red Bull, which is the push rod rear, because that gives you a little bit more space for the diffuser and rear aerodynamics, at least in theory. So it's all about the mechanical gubbinses of the car, but actually aerodynamics is king of everything in reality.
Isn't it just?
Kind
Thank you very much, Sam.
Kind of like what I said, but better.
I mean, I didn't want to say, but yes. Max Verstappen is back out again on those yellow marked C3
C3 tire. C3 tire.
Three tyres.
Yeah.
Sorry, C3. Sorry, 4 is the C4 is the red tyre.
So that's going to be our softest tire that we have next week.
Danny Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda. I'm going to struggle calling them RB because that's what I get called because they're my initials.
Oh, of course.
So I get called RB all the time. So now I'm getting really confused.
You're going to be looking around over your shoulder all the time.
I'm doing that all the time. So I hope they have a good season. Otherwise, it could be quite awkward for me.
It'll look good on your CV.
Great on my CV. Talking of somebody who's got a great CV, Ted Kravitz. He's down in the pit lane for us at the moment. Ted.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, Rach. Hello, Ant. Hello, everybody. Again from the pit lane. Yes, Rachel, both you and in Formula One at least, Rubens Barrichello, Ross Brawn and Ruth Buscombe also have those issues with RB. But yeah, RB's fine for the rest of us. Right, you're talking about suspension. Sorry I've been away, by the way. I've been recording a bit for this evening's testing notebook where I tried to sum up everything that's happened in Formula One over the winter in 60 seconds. And Rachel, do you think I managed it?
Yes, Ted, I have absolute faith. Oh.
I didn't. It took me about 90, it took me about a minute 12. So I couldn't even do that. But yeah, you'll be able to see what that is later. But just to let you know what's happening at Williams, if you're wondering why they're not out on track at the moment. They're trying something different on the front suspension. So a different solution to not only the front suspension torsion bars, but I'm also seeing a ride height adjustment and maybe a camber change as well. So one of those things that they do, just to go through the range of suspension options. And you know, when you're sort of describing pull rod or push rod, as you have been over the last few minutes, I like to sort of do a little experiment with my hands. And here's one that you can do. If you pretend that your fist is the tire, and then the push rod, you can put the side of your hand. That's fine for the chassis. So push rod is your finger pushing against it like that. That's on the Williams. You can see the suspension upright going into the side of the chassis. It's a push rod, and as the tire takes some load or the car goes into heave, which is up and down, or yaw, and you can imagine the push rod pushing against. That's quite a natural thing. Invert it. That's the tire, and that's the pull rod. And imagine the pull rod being pulled out. Then it's being pulled out by the rocker and the suspension arm insides from underneath. It feels a little bit different. It feels sort of physically, kinematically, if you want to say that, a little bit not what you would normally do with a suspension arm, having it pull out something from the chassis, almost that it's going to pull out the bit itself and separate the wheel from the chassis. Doesn't happen, of course. But yeah, as you've been saying, it's mainly aerodynamic rather than kinematic, because they sort of do the same things. And Williams have decided to go push rod at the front, and I believe they have kept with push rod. They've gone to push rod at the back, albeit a very narrow angle, as you were saying, because Mercedes have gone that way through, and they use a Mercedes gearbox. So yeah, I'll leave you to some images of the front of the Williams and quite detailed changes that are going on. By the way, Rachel and Anthony, have you had a word about the fat noses? I just went past Alpine, and their nose is really, really rotund, isn't it? Really wide, really flat, really fat. And this Williams is actually quite a sort of fat nose as well. I will get to the bottom between now and the end of testing of exactly why that is, why we're seeing none of the slim noses that we saw last year.
great. I look forward to it, Ted. I would say, actually, on the Aston Martin as well, they have the colouring, the green colouring on the nose, and then at the bottom, it's back to carbon fibre, and it's in the way, and it's shaped in the way that some, and you won't understand this, but some dresses are, in that you have a panel down the middle that's a light colour, and down the sides you have black, and it gives you it gives you a slimmer silhouette, and it feels like that's what's been done on the Aston Martin. When you look at the nose of the Aston Martin, it has a slimmer silhouette, but actually when you look at it closely in the light, you will see it's just as wide and fat as everyone else's.
Very well described. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I mean, it's not just about the saving of weight, is it? You know, with all the extra carbon fibre panels and areas that we're seeing on these cars, as they still struggle to meet the weight limits that's quite aggressively set, I must say, by the FIA within the regulations, and that's why we see so much black area on the cars. It's just carbon fibre. They really can't afford to put the paint on in literal terms, of course, but in terms of weight, it is a currency to them.
But these cars are the heaviest they'll be all season, though, right now, aren't they, at testing? I mean, they will find ways where they lose weight throughout the rest of the car, and the paint will come on towards the end. They will be more colourful by the end of the season.
I hope so. I hope so, because I think it's you know, quite a serious issue, I think, for the fans. They like seeing the differences between the cars' liveries, and we don't want to see the cars mostly painted black. We want to see them have their own identity. And yeah, I think the fans really, they deserve that. They deserve to see the cars and teams able to showcase the differences between the liveries, the cars out there. I mean, and I personally, I don't like seeing them struggling to meet that weight limit and having to resort to taking away colour from the car.
Oscar Piastri out at the moment, putting some more laps on the board now. 25 for him so far, fourth quickest as yet this morning. But Mercedes, George Russell's only done half the number of laps of Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso, for example, right now. Just 19 laps for George Russell in the Mercedes so far today. You actually want to get out there and get running, don't you?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of the teams, particularly Mercedes, were focused on doing, we saw those aero rakes on the car earlier on, and that's extra weight going on as well. You know, that, like you touched on, Rachel, they're saying that, you know, the teams are putting extra weight into the car in terms of extra sensors, and it'll be no more so than this first day of testing. It takes time to take all that equipment, all those extra sensors off the car, and you know, you can be talking about 20 kilos plus of extra weight on these cars at this stage. So maybe they're just going through the program there in terms of those aero rakes on the car, and then starting to then get into perhaps some more lengthy setup changes as the rest of the day unfolds. The interesting thing about the first day of testing is that you see a progression of the circuit in terms of how green it starts. By that I mean not much rubber down on the track. We call it a green track when we're talking of a circuit that's quite new. You know, it hasn't had much running on, and it's quite dusty, especially here in the desert. It gets very dusty, and it takes time to basically clean the track up. And you're using these cars as big hoovers. They're just getting that dust off the racing line, and it starts to get more rubbered in, and the tyre likes to work on top of its own rubber rather than on a slippery, grainy, green surface. So as that continues to rubber in today, the circuit will improve in speed, but then it starts to get hotter, and the wind usually picks up here more in the afternoon as well, and that diminishes the progression of the track that it naturally would get. If it just stayed stable temperatures and wind condition, you'd just see the lap times on a nice plot on the graph, just getting faster and faster and faster. The car would feel nicer and nicer. No matter what you did to it, you'd be saying, yeah, that setup change is better. Oh yeah, even this one, that's another improvement again. Whereas today ends up staying quite flat in its progression, because as the track rubbers in, it also gets hotter and more windy.
But then it gets cooler because we're running until 7 o'clock tonight. So do you not cover most of the conditions you'll face across the season apart from rain? When you
so later on it'll have, you know, the race takes part in the dark here, with dusk to dark. So the track continues to get faster and faster, and that's what they're going to experience later on today. But tomorrow morning, when they hit the track at the same time they did today, it's going to feel much improved. from how they end today. And it's very easy, therefore, to start getting lost in what setup changes have a bigger influence in terms of a positive change or a negative change. Sometimes you put something on the car or you try a setup option that you don't really feel it's any better, particularly if it's a lengthy change and the track's continuing to get hotter. So tomorrow is the interesting one, because it will start fast and then just get slower and slower as the day goes on, because you've already got the track nicely rubbered in from day one, and then it just continues to get slower as it gets hotter. And that's the point of tomorrow afternoon, where you can easily start getting lost as a driver and as a team, where the team are expecting one thing to be highlighted and the driver saying, actually, that felt much worse. Or at best, it was a transparent change. And I used to love that in my testing days, really having
You used to love getting lost?
No, just having to stay disciplined and having to stay honest with what setup change was genuinely better or worse, and going through it very scientifically.
And not just your driving.
Well, no, and your driving has to stay consistent as well. So getting yourself up to speed as a driver is super important. And they will be dialing themselves in a lot of the time through this first day. It takes longer than you think, actually, to get right up to speed, where you can slap a new set of tyres on and nail it every time within a couple of tenths of each other. So you need the consistency from your driving. That's where better drivers out there will be an advantage, because you can start working through the testing program more methodically and accurately, more importantly, than other drivers that are taking longer to get up to speed. And that's what I like to see, the skill of the driver really coming into it.
Just having a look at the Red Bull rear wing as part of their upgrades this year, which kind of surprised everybody. The last team to launch, weren't they, as well? The last team to show off what they were bringing, and then everybody was surprised, which, as we were talking to Jolien about earlier on, it's great to see them still innovating despite dominating last year, despite walking away with the championship with more than double the points of their nearest rival in the constructors, and Max winning it so easily. They are still innovating.
And you look at that car coming towards you down that main straight, it's just straight as a dart, isn't it? It does not move. They've completely mastered the attitude of the car. Look at it, absolutely stiff. That's what you want for the aerodynamics. You don't want it to be diving around or bouncing and porpoising. And even the Red Bull in 2022, we were raving about its ride quality, but wow, it looks so stuck down now. Even in the straight line, it's so smooth the way it rides the bumps. Very impressive. When you think, I mean, it's like almost like looking at an active ride car, the active ride suspension. It's like it's got this, these fancy road cars you get today with air suspension and active ride. It looks like one of those coming towards you, not a car that should be heavily influenced by, in a mechanical sense, the bumps on the track. It's really masterful how they've managed to make it look so well poised there. Because you watch any other category of racing that comes here, so I come here for the World Endurance Championship, for example. It was the last race of last year, and the cars buckaroo and bounce all the way down the straight, and it really highlights this track for what it is. It is a bumpy racetrack.
But the Red Bull making it look not so.
At this point, yeah. And here it comes again. I mean, I know they might not be running it so aggressive in terms of the ride heights. It still, to me, looks like quite a heavy car. And they're clearly doing race run performances. So a little kick up of dust from the back of the car there over the biggest bump that we have here, just over that bridge section. And there they are at RB, Daniel Ricciardo, studying the data with his engineering team. And just, at this stage, is so eager to get in the car.
I was going to say, is he looking at it going,
that was
can't wait
with
to get in
Laurent McKees,
there.
of course.
Can't wait to get in there this afternoon and take it round myself. Well, I was talking to Jolien about this. Which were you? Were you the driver that got the morning session or the afternoon session? And did you ever get to run last?
It wasn't like that. Back in my day, as they say, we had...
In black and white, was it?
Yeah, we had dodging dinosaurs on the track and all sorts. Yeah, it was... so
just before you come to that, that's a lot of Flowbiz paint, Anthony.
But that really goes to show how the car penetrates the air first with the front wing. Then the suspension comes into it. The wheels, of course, as well, create a huge amount of turbulence. And that's what they're looking at. They're looking at that. That is the whole journey of the airflow from the start of the car to the rear, and that's what Sam was talking about. You can't just put somebody else's front wing on your car, because it will influence wrongly, I guarantee it, wrongly, the way that the rest of the airflow goes over the rest of your bodywork that you've designed to be in conjunction with the front wing.
And the front wings themselves are quite incredible, because I remember when Aston Martin brought a different front wing to a race last year, and going up to it and looking at the changes that were so minute but had such an impact on the airflow on the car.
Absolutely, and again, you know, it's no fluke that or coincidence that they've heavily painted the suspension as well at the front of the car. That's nothing to do with mechanical grip or balance, pure aerodynamics.
And that's the car I was talking about a little earlier on that had the new floor towards the end of last season, and saw some real improvements from it. OK, so back to what we were talking about in testing then. It wasn't in your day, you didn't get to run an afternoon session or be the last one in the car?
Well, we had no simulation. We had no driver simulators when I was racing. So that's another thing that's really improved.
It was tough in your day, wasn't it? It was much harder in your day.
Well, I mean, physically, yeah, because we were doing about 15,000 kilometres of testing.
Was it unlimited?
I think it was, you know. We had a whole separate testing team within the team itself. We're going to see probably running wide in turn 4. Should be, the wind is on your side actually turning into that corner, but you go through the crosswind as you go through it, and so they're turning in with pretty good grip, and it's probably disappearing a bit as they go through the corner. It's a very tricky corner, turn 4. Very, very tricky, because it dips down, it's cambered, not in your favour, so negative camber, so it catches the car quite awkwardly on the exit, and it's either the rear trying to let go or the front pushes on. But yeah, things start to get a bit easier after that, and the higher speed of 6 and 7. And here's Oscar Piastri into the final corner. I always get beaten up for this in the simulator when I refer to turn 14 as the final corner, because there are 15 corners.
You just don't consider 15 as a corner, so...
Not really. It can catch you out if you haven't prepared 14 properly.
Well, George Russell is out. Mercedes say they've just been doing some usual testing changes. That's why he was in the garage for so long. So the only car still in the pit lane right now is Kevin Magnussen for Haas, and Ted's down there for us. Ted.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so nothing to worry about, say, Mercedes. I can tell you that I was about to call them Alfa Romeo, Sauber have just made a nose and front wing change to Valtteri Bottas. So he's just trying a different spec front wing and nose cone on his run that you're seeing at the moment on the timing. And at Haas, it seems to be some sort of fuel system related issue that they've been trying to figure out. So if you can see this mechanic with his arm buried deep into the fuel area, I don't know if it's actually in the fuel tank itself or just in the sort of area around it. That seems to be what the issue that they've been grappling with. So, you know, unlike Mercedes, who've already had the filming day yesterday and are just making the usual testing changes, this does seem to be something that's gone slightly wrong and that they need to fix. Now, of course, I know it's a truism, but it's worth repeating. When each driver has only got a day and a half, and the team themselves have only got 3 days to sort their cars out before the start of the season, and that's it. To gather all the data they need for the driver to get all the practice he needs, and for them to work on reliability, having, what's this, the second little reliability issue of the day after the rate came off. I suppose they can't really call that a reliability issue, but it stopped them anyway. For Haas, isn't the greatest start to testing so far, but this has kept them in the garage. There's the new boss, Ao Komatsu, on the right-hand side as we look at it. So this has kept them in the garage for, what has it been, half an hour, I think? Rachel, probably half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. 32 laps.
Just about.
Yeah, they've got on the board.
Yeah. Looks like they're just about done with the repair. So that's good news. And if we look on the right-hand side, such as, talking about Sauber, such as the preponderance, the enthusiasm which they're embracing fluoro green. Whenever you see, I've got to tell you, whenever you see anything else fluoro green in the pit lane, you think, oh, the team borrowed this off Sauber. So it's a really weird sense, because when you do go down to the Sauber garage, I mean, everything. If it's got a surface, they are going to throw fluoro green at it, and that also extends, I've got to tell you, to the pit box itself. I don't know if you've noticed it, Rachel, but I think you're coming down to relieve me in a minute, or you'll come down and have a look. You know the pit boxes, which are normally decked out in white or yellow tape. Well, have you seen this? That also at Sauber here is fluoro green.
Okay.
There you go. So yeah,
wow.
If it's got carbon fibre, or if it's living, breathing, or not, paint it green. That's the philosophy down here at Sauber.
Well, Ted, you're looking very well next to the green. You can actually, I think you can probably carry it. Oh, I'm not sure, actually. I was going to say you can carry it off. It's a very difficult green to carry off. Thank you very much, Ted.
You could use that as a green screen, couldn't you? Put him anywhere.
You could, actually. That's a very good point. Stand in front of it, and he could be anywhere in the world. But he is, in fact, at the Sauber garage. This is Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin on track right now, and currently third fastest with a 1:33.3, some 8 tenths behind that Max Verstappen has put on the board, which was a 1:32 a little earlier, actually. He broke the 1:32, so Fernando going around now. Some good mileage, 51 laps for the Aston Martin, the most of any team so far today.
Yeah, it's looked good in terms of reliability. It's looked good when I was out on circuit earlier on. I still think it was at that particular time the best car through turn 1. He could get the car turned very nicely. The rear looked good as he started to get on power, and then build the speed through turn 2, where you need to rely a bit more towards the aerodynamic performance of the car, and even there it looked really good. So they've hit the ground running with Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso, and it looks like they're now working on a race run on the C3 tyre, the medium, which will be the next week's soft tyre. And yeah, there we go. So 7 or nearly 8 seconds. Yeah, 8 seconds off the fastest time, which is a sure sign that the car is heavy, older tyres, race run spec, a managed battery state of charge as well. So you're not giving it full beans for that one lap. You're in that happy equilibrium between. It's a bit of give and take really for the battery when you're in the race run. It seeks a bit of harvesting from the kinetic side from the car, and then delivers some battery power as well. And you're always trying to keep the SOC, the state of charge of the battery, somewhere in the middle on a race run. But for a qualifying or a shorter run attempt, you'll be more aggressive, it'll be more deployment than harvesting, and therefore you get a lot more speed. It can be up to a second's worth or more of performance.
Dan Fallow's saying that you'll see obvious differences on this Aston Martin, the nose and the front wing, but he says there are lots you won't see. We've gone for a lighter, more aerodynamically efficient race car that will operate across a wider range of circuits. But one of the teams, as I mentioned earlier, to say they've got a good platform for development, and it's an evolution, a strong evolution of their car from last year, which started very well, dipped away in the middle of the season, and then they seem to find some answers again slightly towards the end.
I think most of them will just be a strong evolution from last year's car. Some, more towards heavier development. But again, I think the cost cap really restricts you in terms of how, and also the actual regulations of these cars. I mean, we heard it right from the word go that they were quite restrictive from the regulations. That's why they all end up looking fairly similar straight away. Very little variation in design from this modern, this current generation of Formula 1 car.
Ted's down at Alpine. Ted.
Well, let's have a look. One thing that testing is also about is to check that everything's legal. So have a look at this at Alpine. They're about to do a nose change. But look at the stickers on the inside of the end plate. That's connected to a camera. So either side, see the FI logo on this new nose. That's a camera in the camera mounting. It's a camera that belongs to Alpine, and it's looking at those points, what look like sort of basic QR codes on the inside of the end plate, and that is to measure the flexion of the front wing, because they have to check that it's doing what they want aerodynamically. They also have to check that it's not going to flex too much. The outer parts of that front wing is not going to flex too much beyond the legality, and the only way of doing that, to be sure, as well as measuring it with sensors, is to do it this way with the camera. It's the kind of thing that we've seen before, haven't we, Rach and Anthony? We've seen teams put little dots or something on the inside. It's not actually by regulation, whereas the dots on the rear wing to measure rear wing deflection is something they have to do by regulation. But yeah, looking close up at this Alpine, it's actually a very tidy car. They've taken some weight out of the car, not least with not very much paint or stickers, and tidied up the other bits, not least to the rear suspension, the gearbox, the changes at the rear they wanted to make. And the front seems sensible as well. They've gone with the full span front wing flaps, sort of unlike Mercedes. Again with the fat nose on the Alpine. Rachel, what is it with these fat noses? Why have they got so much wider rather than last year? But as I say, I will find out. More of a kind of Red Bull Ferrari inspired from last year side pod entries, but with a nicely sized undercut towards the rear of the car as well. So yeah, you see Esteban Ocon with that different front wing. I'm sure they'll make another change before his next run.
Great, thank you, Ted. They might also be picking out a few bits of gravel, mightn't they? We just saw him go off there as you were talking, Ted, on a replay. Quite a big moment for him.
Yeah, he just lost the rear. It snapped on him. It's what the drivers called a snap oversteer moment. Getting on power. I mentioned turn 4 earlier on. It either understeers progressively or can have the rear let go. But that was quite a wild snap. And he did well to keep the car pointing in a fairly straight line, but obviously dragged him off the circuit and through that little bit of gravel as well, which yeah, can do damage not just to the front wing, but also to the underside of the car as well, the floor, that very delicate floor that we were talking about earlier on. Any kind of damage to that floor is going to be quite costly in lap times. We saw from the likes of Fernando Alonso in Barcelona qualifying last year, where just one small trip through the gravel on the exit of the final corner in, I think it was Q2, maybe it was even Q1, and yeah, he waved goodbye to a lot of performance there that particular day. So yeah, damage the floor from a small moment like that, and yeah, it ends up being a much more costly mistake than you'd imagine.
Ferrari have called this season Operation Relaunch.
Operation Relaunch,
which is, it's quite a bold, well, it's a bold statement. It certainly suggests almost going back to the drawing board, doesn't it? But they actually had some good development last year.
Yeah, I mean, you'd say, I know they finished behind Mercedes ultimately in the championship, but they're the ones that won a race, other than Red Bull. So the only team that won a race, and I think, you know, they've always got a pretty decent car here as well. Actually, in qualifying, the car looks pretty good to drive. Maybe a little bit too hard on its tyres still in race trim, and I think that's what all the other teams have to unlock going forward from last season, as Leclerc goes a bit wide in turn 13. Yeah, the teams have to. One thing, just seeing there again, compared to the Red Bull, the car's bouncing a lot.
It is bouncing.
And that's one thing that Ferrari have never seemed to completely get rid of in their car. And yeah, you see it there, just the front just fluttering up and down. Those inconsistencies of ride height change, sparking away again as it goes over the bumps before turn 1. Just, you know, it just seems like they still haven't fixed that, which I see as a bit of a weak link in their design philosophy at Ferrari. You know, it's just losing the rear in 13 as we saw the effects of real time. So yeah, it's just, you go through a lot of crosswind in turn 13. It's a long corner, you spend a lot of time in it, and therefore you go through the whole range of the wind coming towards the front of the car, then more to the side of the car, then towards the rear of the car as you exit finally the corner, depending on where the wind's going. And you also get a bit of a swirl effect as well as the other cars circulate the track at that point. It's quite high up. I think it's the highest point of the track. There's not a huge elevation change here. It's around 40 meters, I think, by memory. But yeah, you're at the highest point of the track up there.
As we have a closer look at Max Verstappen lap.
Yeah, so here he comes to, well, it's a bit of a mix-up of different corners. So this is 9 and 10. The car tucks in well there. And yeah, once again, just, you know, looking at the car, even in the straight line, it's just so nice in its ride control, I'd say. And that really favours the, it goes a long way to benefiting the aero performance of the car, but also for the driver as well. I mean, with pinpoint accuracy, being able to pick your braking point. If the driver's not bouncing around as much as we saw Leclerc's head, it's nothing like it used to be, obviously, in 22 and last season. but it's you know, if you can give the driver a bit more comfort as well, you will unlock more performance from them, not just from the car.
That's got to be the most valuable notebook in the paddock, hasn't it? That notebook. I tucked under Adrian Newey's arm there.
Yeah, what other team
Love
would
to see
give
what's in
to
that notebook. I
nick
probably
that
wouldn't
book.
understand any of it, but I would love to see what's in that notebook. Right, Yuki Tsunoda, that isn't the Sauber team. That
Yes,
is...
picked up a little bit more out.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, so
That
like,
is, in fact, yeah, the RB, but it has a lot of flow there. Sorry, Ant, you're saying.
so like I was saying before, you know, the drivers are so sensitive to that wind change, that direction change. Actually, this circuit's brilliant because you've got the big tower before turn 1, and there's a huge flag, Bahraini flag, that flies in the wind, and you can see before you even go out, you just look at that and you go, oh yeah, it's changed direction, the wind has changed direction. So it's a good telltale for the drivers just to prepare. You don't even have to ask your engineer which way the wind's going. You can't see it from inside the car, but yeah, before you go out, I'd quite often look at that and go, all right, yeah, so the wind's picking up and it's changed direction. That means if the flag is, you know, giving me a tailwind now towards turn 1, I know I'm going to have to brake a bit earlier. And,
This is one of the... Sorry, go on.
no, it's just, you know, you have to have a plan before you get into the car. You don't just drive through the seat of your pants all the time. And that's why Yuki's asking his engineer, right, that, you know, wind's picked up, yeah, so I'm going to have to change my style a bit, learn where to brake a bit earlier or later for different corners, and what that's going to do to the balance of the car.
I literally wrote down at 10 past 11, winds, headwind into turn 1. And within an hour and a half, or just over an hour and a half, that's changed into more of a crosswind across there. But this is one of those tracks, Ant, as I was saying, you actually can see the flags pointing in one direction at one end and in a different direction at the other end, which is not helpful, at the end of a straight, which is not helpful.
There is that flag.
There is that flag.
Sits on top of the tower, and yeah, so from the pit lane, the drivers be able to just look out, have a look up there, and you can see straight away. Looks like, yeah, still a bit of a headwind into turn 1. I mean, you can see how fierce it is as well. Actually, when I was standing down there, it didn't. Yeah, and the trees flapping around in the wind. It didn't feel as bad as that. So yeah, Yuki's right. He's felt it in the car, and his engineer has confirmed it.
Don't stand near a car in the pit lane, by the way, when it comes out with Flowbiz paint on.
Someone's got to.
I've got some trainers at home that are splattered.
Yeah, someone's got a tough job there to clean that up.
That's going to be a lot of effort this afternoon. As we mentioned earlier, actually, we have got guests coming in as well. Felipe Dragovic will be talking to us. We'll have hear from Pat Fry, Pat Simmons, James Bowles and James Key today as well throughout the rest of this first day of pre-season testing. Max Verstappen then still topping the times with a 1:32.5. Charles Leclerc second quickest so far with a 1:33. But laps on the board count around here, and it's the most for Fernando Alonso, third quickest, but 55 laps in the can so far in the Aston Martin. And George Russell just 24.
Right, this car, the Haas, Kevin Magnussen, hasn't looked brilliant so far. When I was standing down there at turn 1, it looked like the most tricky car to navigate through that part of the circuit. So, yeah, keen to ride on board and stay with him here through turn 13. He comes, picks up a bit of understeer mid-corner for that one, and the rear not quite there for him as he tries to apply the power, just stepping out ever so slightly, and that takes away a bit of confidence from inside the cockpit. Rolls the car into the final corner, turn 14, even though there are 15 of them, and it looked like a little bit of a better balance there. He didn't really push the apex too much, or the braking zone too much, I should say. You can hear the harvesting of the engine, the kinetic just doing its thing before he even comes to the braking point. Turn 1, he can't really pinch it as tight. This is what I was seeing when I was down there. He couldn't really pinch the car as tight as he'd want to. Through the apex of 1, and he's picking up a bit of understeer, which then compromises the line through turn 2. And turn 4, waiting for the front. The rear seems okay on the exit there, but he had to wait for it. He didn't have the full confidence, and again, really taking it quite slowly through turn 6 and 7. The understeer picking up again. He's locked up into turn 8, and the driver on his outside was that Aston Martin. No, it was George Russell, actually, in the Mercedes. Probably wondering, why are you so close to me on the exit? He wouldn't have seen the lock-up necessarily. So, yeah, it still looks a bit of a handful. having ridden a whole lap now on board with Magnussen. I know he's on the hard tyre, but it's still, you know, it's not really there for him. And again, the understeer just pushing him on through turn 11.
And they brought that update, that big update to Austin. Didn't quite work out as planned. They were hoping for much more from it. They've even said they expect to be at the back of the field almost at the start of this season while they try and work on this car and develop. I'm going to leave you, Anthony Davidson, in the very, very capable hands of Alex Jakes as I depart the commentary box for the time being, and we'll be back this afternoon. But I'll leave you in the capable hands of him while you tell us a little bit more about this Haas.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Yeah, so back onto the main straight here. I'm just looking for the driver's head as well to see the level of bouncing or porpoising that we've got going on. It doesn't seem too bad on this race run for Magnussen. Into the braking zone we come now. Can you pinch it a bit tighter this time in one? I just go away from him there. This is the moment I saw through turn 6 and 7. He's already out of kilter in a way from the understeer he had in the higher speed, and that's what led in many ways to the lockup in turn 8. But I think he was going to, yeah, here's the off-board shot of it as well. So a bit of the on the curve on the exit of 7, carries that lockup, and meets Russell on the exit of that corner. Another shot of it as well. So the bump's also not helping, it's contributing to that front locking up. So yeah, there's a bit of work to do down there at Haas. And yeah, you're doing the race run, you get a good feel for where you need to be taking the evolution of the setup. And hopefully they're just trying something on that car that, you know, this morning that has made things a little bit more difficult for Kevin behind the wheel.
Hello, Anthony.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Very rare do we get the chance to speak on air together these days.
It's true, isn't it? Yeah.
It is one of the joys of F1 testing. And we thank Rachel Brooks, who will be back with you later on. We're looking down there at Ao Komatsu, new team principal at Haas. One of the things he talked about at the launch was bringing the drivers more into the process of developing the car. Now, devotees will remember the infamous year where they had to go back to the launch spec with, in the Romain Grosjean era, they had to go back to the launch spec because none of the updates were working. Says he wants to change that. Now, not to inflate your ego too much, Mr. Davidson, but you are well known for your excellent driver feedback.
Am I?
Or at least you were.
I was.
In yesteryear. So I put to you, where's the balance for a team between listening to the driver when they get out of the car and listening to every single detail and then knowing when the team knows best, a balance that you could argue Haas have never quite mastered, despite their success being a new team that have scored points in Formula 1 throughout their time in the sport.
There's another test driver, of course, with Mick Schumacher down at Mercedes, and you know the team do rely on not just the test drivers, but it's more so today than ever before the race drivers, because track time is so limited, and the drivers love tests like this on the circuit where you're going to race. I know some people have issues with that and say, well, what extra content is it going to bring to race week? The fact that they can iron out all of their problem or potential problems in multiple days of testing. But yeah, the race drivers, they do have, particularly they have a lot of say in where you take the design of the car, the development of the car, and actually more often than not, it's what's perceived as the faster driver has more authority in where to take the design or the balance of the car. We hear that, quite often. So we hear rumours from Red Bull, for example. Oh, Max Verstappen starts the season, doesn't really like the car that much. He's quite close in performance to Sergio Perez. As the year unfolds, there's a natural separation of performance. Max gets into the groove. He starts tuning the car to how he wants, blah, 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 blah. And you see the end result. So yeah, it's that to some extent, that bears some weight. But the team, there is a balance. The team have the data that comes from the wind tunnel, and I think they're kind of like their own. They're their own entity, the wind tunnel. It's a very secretive operation.
Yeah.
I mean, not many people in the factory have a key card to get into the wind tunnel department. And that's with it all in-house. The problem with somewhere like Haas is that it's very segmented. I think that is part of the problem there, in that, you know, the wind tunnel it's not in Banbury. That, you know, the Banbury's pretty much just a workshop, from what I gather. Maybe some design parts come from the car there, but that's where the car is put together, essentially. And the wind tunnel's elsewhere, and, you know, very fractious team in that respect. And it can work, of course it can work like that, but you know, I think communication is definitely key, and that's, you know, one key element to that communication is obviously the driver's detailed feedback on what they feel from the car.
And I'm thinking, it's other teams, but I'm thinking of, say, the update that Mercedes brought in Austin, where they said it was not actually worth that much time on the racetrack, but it unlocked performance from Lewis Hamilton. Similar thing for Charles Leclerc. Wasn't a huge amount of lap time for Ferrari when they brought the update to Japan, but it unlocked Charles being able to drive the car the way he wanted, and we saw certainly one lap pace towards the end of the year. 3 pole positions out of the final 5 qualifying sessions. Just the reason I asked, it just intrigued whether, now that they've got a team principal who's been talking about changing some processes there, some workflows there, maybe the balance might be more towards the driver on the feedback.
Yeah, you know, I think underestimate the driver's feel at your peril.
Yeah.
You know, because like you just heard there, Yuki Tsunoda straight away on it that the wind has changed. Wind has changed, yeah. That's a statement. It's not a question. Yeah. He's felt it, and he's wanting validation to his feelings. So if a driver can feel that the wind has changed, then of course they're going to feel the difference between how the car feels on with these new brakes that you might have put on, or a new suspension design that you're running, or of course the aerodynamic effect of the car. They're going to pick up these things. They can feel the difference between a couple of PSI of tyre pressure difference. So you have to take their comments seriously. You have to rely on what they can give in terms of feedback, particularly a driver like Fernando Alonso. You look back on here from this great onboard shot, looking at the pro at work, and you know, he's going to be full of information after this day, and he's going to sit down with the team and take them through and a debrief. This is better than last year's car, this bit maybe not so much improved, and go through a whole array of exactly what he feels with the car and where from this moment the team can make even more progress. And if you ignore that, then yeah,
with Fernando, you'll definitely be hearing.
You'll be hearing again. He's not going to keep quiet, but yeah, sometimes it is ignored, and you know, all the drivers have a very good feel for what their car's doing under them. But the trouble is that some drivers have differences of feeling between one side of the garage and the other as well. Different driving styles come into play, which kind of muddies the water, really.
As Fernando Alonso goes over the line to complete his 58th tour of this 14-turn circuit. And he continues on for another run. 47 minutes to go of the opening session of pre-season testing. 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon for a couple more days after this one, and then the opening Grand Prix of the year on a Saturday, which I'm going to keep saying so that there's no one out there who accidentally tunes in one day too late, because we wouldn't want that at all. We've got another rare treat in the commentary box now, where we've been joined by roamer of the pit lane extraordinaire, Mr. Ted Kravitz. How are you, sir?
Very well. Hello, Alex. Hello, Anthony. Hello, everybody. Yes, good morning if you're still watching us back in the UK or Europe, where I believe it is still the morning. Good afternoon, good evening if you're watching us in Australia and around the world. But yeah, it is the afternoon here. So I've done two things when I first walked into the commentary box. First of all, I've turned the temperature down because, as Anthony will tell you, Alex, that's what I do in every room I go into in hot climates. Is
you make yourself comfortable, Ted.
I intend to. I mean, not for very long, but while I'm here, in hot climates. And the second thing I've done is eschew. That's a word. Eschew.
It is a word.
I've said thanks, but no thanks
to the chair.
To the chair. Because you forget who taught me. You forget where I'm from, Alex Jakes.
I don't.
You forget, Anthony Davidson,
I
when the
forget.
last time I was in a commentary box, who I was alongside.
You were alongside the Don, Murray Walker.
I was.
This is where you started, Ted.
And it was. Well,
in the com box.
I didn't
as the com. Well,
specifically, I started in
little bit of logging.
the airless room of the back of a TV outside broadcast van, logging the sessions. So it was only halfway through 1997 that I
and graduated
into the commentary box. But yeah, Murray never used a chair. Martin Brundle doesn't use a chair very much. David Croft, the other Don, the doyen, along with yourself, I don't believe he uses a chair particularly much. Or Anthony, you'll be able to tell me.
Not so much. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes he will sit down, but yeah, I'd say more often than not, he's standing up.
Good.
In the need to project.
Good. Need to project. It opens up your lungs. It gives you a sense of immediacy. I know you've got to do 85 hours a day here, so you might.
Yeah, if this was the opening Grand Prix of the year, I'm absolutely on my feet. But you've got to ease yourself into testing.
But let me give you some tales from the pit lane,
please,
because this seems to be the time of day where everybody's going through a bit of nuts and bolts. Practice starts, I'm seeing a lot of them, legality checks, fuel systems checks, all the kind of nuts and bolts that they know. This is the heat of the day. It is getting quite hot down there now. What are we up to? Track temperature 39.8, so 40 degrees, air temperature 24. It feels more or less that. But here we go, as a replay for you, Anthony.
Yes, it's George Russell coming down the main straight. A little bit of bounce in there, we could just hear it. Just hear it under my voice there, and again, there's still a little bit of touching. It's going to happen down in turn one, though. That's the critical part. And yeah, it seems to be able to get the car turned pretty well. Ride, you'd have to say, not as good as the Red Bull. Oh yeah, definitely not as good as the Red Bull. Very low there, and crashing into that the biggest bump on the track. So that's one of the biggest hits I've seen actually from any car. So yeah, still a bit of work to be done with those nuts and bolts, Ted.
Yeah, but everyone more or less going through, you know, the stuff that isn't sort of performance dependent. I'm sure there'll be various levels of fuel on board, and yeah, I think maybe after the lunch break, some cars will have new drivers, such as this one. Lando Norris will get in for the afternoon session. McLaren, one of the few teams, I think it's fair to say, actually splitting their drivers every day. What have you spotted on the
Looks like he's on new tyres here, hence the crawling outlap as well. I just spotted the shiny edge of those Pirelli tyres. I'm so glad they do that with the what is it, the release agent or something you use on the tyre, and it just gives us a chance to see, oh yeah, they're on fresher tyres, or brand new tyres in fact. So yeah, crawling around with quite a hot track temperature. You're going to let this Aston Martin past on the left-hand side and then get back onto the racing line to hopefully give us a bit more of a performance run.
I don't know how much you've spoken about the McLaren so far, but you know, going into this test there was a lot of anticipation. There was a suggestion from Lando or from the team, whether it was said or not out loud, but there's more to come. We're going to have some DRS flap open. We're going to have some things that, you know, we haven't shown you everything. Well, it was Lando who said, why should we show you everything when we don't have to? There hasn't been a huge lot that we didn't see in the pre-test pictures that have appeared here. And I've asked the team, are we going to see some new bits on day 2 and 3? And they say, no, that's not in the plan at the moment. So maybe it's just the floor edge, the diffuser, the bits they could cover up that they decided to. But yeah, there are a few less new bits on there than I thought I'd seen. I'll let you do the rest of that now.
Yeah, so he's a little bit wide actually through turn 6. I think he was expecting a bit more from this car on these new tyres than he actually had. And so he ran a little bit wide through 6. He won't be happy about that. But yeah, sitting at the moment, his best time 1.2 seconds off. He was 4/10 down on this lap through sector 1, but it's not even a personal best for him, as you can see on the bottom of the screen there. So now the car touching quite a bit down towards turn 11. You've got the wind behind you there, and again just misses the apex, and you're off the track. So you wave goodbye to this particular lap time. And that's what I was saying earlier on to Rachel, that you've got to have the knowledge of what the wind is doing to the car at all times, and he's now in the turbulence of the car in front as well. So you know, it's gone away from this. If this was a qualifying run, you'd be you'd be saying it wasn't very well managed in terms of distance to the car in front. It's hard in this session because the Aston's clearly on a race run in front. You're trying to do more of a performance run, hence the DRS being open and the new tyres. The car did look pretty heavy to me though as well, and I'm sure he could have improved that time despite the first sector not being his best. But no, that's a lap to forget for Oscar at this point. But in testing, it's things you're constantly learning. And that lap definitely wasn't for nothing. You learn all of the things that didn't work there for you and put it right next time. You've still got time to do that.
So 1 in the bank for Oscar Piastri as we have a look at the bumpiest part of the circuit in slow-mo, and over the bumps goes the Ferrari. Are we going to see anything make a bid for freedom?
Ted's pointing at the side pod.
It's a tyre temperature camera that they decided to put in the side pod.
Oh, is it infrared? An infrared camera?
Looking at the back surface of the rear tyre.
Very good. We used to get that infrared.
I like this
imagery.
Harman Automotive. I like this idea that various cars have names of senior management from other teams on them. So Komatsu is on the Williams, which of course the Haas team boss. Harman, there's a sponsor on the Ferrari. Harman was the technical director of Alpine.
Up and down the grid. Very, very strange. Very strange. Let's send it down to the pit lane now, where Will Buxton is standing by at Red Bull.
Thank you, guys. Ted was mentioning the fact that we're going to see a lot of new bits on the cars, potentially, during testing. Some new bits that the teams are trialling here this week are down to a new regulation which was brought in after the Qatar Grand Prix last year. You remember how stiflingly hot and incredibly humid that race was, and how much the drivers suffered with their physicality as a result. Now, we're used to seeing an opening on the tip of the nose, and that was where the air normally flowed through to get to the drivers. From this year, the teams are able to put a scoop on the chassis itself. Now, if you look to where the number 1 is, just being polished there are 2 of those little scoops, and I believe therefore the airflow to get to the driver. Interestingly, though, that is a panel that can be removed and replaced with one that doesn't have those scoops, so they don't want that additional driver cooling. But if we look towards the tip of the nose, where we would normally see an opening, again, there is a vanity panel there which has been covered up, so you don't actually have that initial opening, and all the teams are experimenting with this today. If we go down to Aston Martin, which we won't do because Fernando's out on track, they have that scoop, but again, no hole in the nose. Some teams aren't running scoops, aren't running the hole. Some teams just running the hole. So all of the teams get into grips with the new way the airflow will run over that nose part of the car with those new scoops brought in. You don't have to use them, but you can, just to increase driver cooling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buxton, down there in the pit lane. 38 minutes to go in the first session on the first day of pre-season testing. Fernando Alonso continuing to log laps up there. This is going to be the end of his 64th tour of the circuit. Verstappen has done 51, Leclerc has done 48, and Alonso now puts 64 on the board.
It's a good point Will makes about the driver cooling, and that has changed. You can see actually, well, you can't see it from this shot, but you can when we're off board of the Aston Martin. There is a similar kind of duct going in at that top part of the nose. And from memory, talking to technical directors and designers, they did always say that's kind of an aerodynamically not a critical area, which is why you put aerials and stuff like that just around the number 14. You see there's a little vent there as well. So if there has been, as a result of Qatar, and as Will was saying, a change to the regulations to allow that, I must say I didn't notice it in the regulations. That was just a suggestion that the FIA made after Qatar, that they will allow that. A scoop or a driver cooling, something to be incorporated. But I didn't notice that was actually in the technical regulations. It might just be a coincidence that they've decided to move some kind of, whether it's driver cooling vent or to cool some other parts of the car, from the tip of the nose to around the driver's number.
Qatar Grand Prix last year, where the drivers really did have to battle through extreme temperatures and humidity. And very unusual to see drivers. George Russell was putting his hands out of the cockpit whilst driving back through the pack after his turn 1 contact, and that suggestion, that allowance put in by the FIA for this year.
But it was double the humidity of here in Bahrain, wasn't
Yes.
it? I seem to remember the humidity was in the 60% in Qatar, which is what made it so difficult. I know it's a cliche, but here in Bahrain, it's very dry heat, isn't it, Anthony? It's very dry heat.
This time of the year, yes, but it can be in summertime. We don't come here in summertime, but apparently it does get very humid. And that's, I think, like you said, Ted, that's really what went against the drivers in Qatar. And it's just when we saw the image, didn't we, of drivers opening their visor even as they're coming down the pit lane in desperation to get a bit of airflow. But when you got that close air, that humidity, it just feels like nothing's coming in. And it's actually it's more the torso area, so body, that you need to cool down, not necessarily your head. But it's all they could do is just try to open their visor, and yeah, obviously that's dangerous as well. The FIA don't want to see that. You know, the visor's there for good reason, and it's got to be closed at all times for good reason. The visors are incredibly strong. These Lexan shield visor that they have. So yeah, you don't want to have any stones coming in, which can often happen. And if you got your visor open in desperation to keep cool, you don't want to imagine the consequences if you were unlucky. But yeah, driving in the heat, there's definite performance loss with that from a driver's point of view, and it's easy. Again, it's easy for that to be overlooked from a team, even for the fans watching this sport. And the only driving experience they have is, with all due respect, in a road car. It's a very difficult physical game when you're in one of these, and you've got the adrenaline up, your heart rate's naturally high because of that, and with a high heart rate your body temperature starts to increase anyway, and there's nothing you can do. Fitness doesn't come into it at that point. It's just you're at the mercy of your blood getting too hot, and you start to become delirious. I've experienced it myself. You become dizzy.
Where was this that you experienced it?
We raced in the World Endurance Championship in Austin in September. Actually, they're going back there this year, at a similar time of year, and it was very, very tough. It was all you could do was a single stint in the car. You normally do double stint, so that's close to 2 hours, but this was just over an hour behind the wheel, and that was enough. You were begging to come out. Obviously, that's in a closed car as well, so you didn't have the luxury of this airflow coming over the visor anyway. And it's just your body temperature just soaring, and you just can't stop it. And it's so hard to quantify how much performance loss is there from a driver. I saw many drivers make a lot of mistakes during that race. Drivers like Fernando Alonso, you wouldn't expect to make a kind of what seemed to be an elementary mistake, just running off the circuit. So the pit stop, Ted's getting excited, there's a pit stop.
Did you spot Alan Permain?
No, I didn't.
RB, jumping over the tensor barrier just then.
I didn't know, good spot.
He was just, as the previous shot, as Bottas was going in, Alan Permain, of course, ex-sporting director at the Enstone team for many years. He was a one-team man for pretty much the whole of his Formula One career until he parted ways with Alpine. And we welcome him back to Formula One as, I don't know the official job title, but I assume it's sporting director of RB. And you just saw him in that previous shot, doing a little, as agile as ever, jumping over the tensor barrier rather than doing that fiddly thing where you have to get it out of its groove.
And then replace it.
Go past and replace it in its groove. But yeah.
I can't get used to this car, Ted. I know you're a big fan of the luminous green, but every time I look at it, I just immediately think it's Flovis paint all over the...
No, it certainly
When are
does.
they going to clean it?
No, it definitely looks like Flovis paint. When it's coming down the pit lane, you think, God, who's doing a massive Flovis experiment?
On every
And
corner.
It's like, oh, it's the Sauber. But no, I've already got used to that. Actually, quite a nice looking car. I have to compliment them. James Key, this is not really his car. He joined too late for the essential design of it, but he is overseeing it from now. They've done a nice job. It's Red Bull-esque from last year, not Red Bull-esque from this year, and it's quite tidy. But if you were, so of course Sauber, one of the teams who are going to swap in the lunch break. So going back to what you're saying in the fatigue, even though you haven't got the humidity and ultimate heat of Qatar that you have here, would you prefer to do the whole day like Max Verstappen, or would you and your teammate, Taku or whoever, want to halve the days like?
Yeah, I'd like to split it.
Would you?
Yeah, I'd like to split. So and try and keep both times that you're in the car to be the same time of day as well, or each day that you're in the car to be a similar time of day at least, so you get a relative back-to-back of things that you've tried, and track condition, trying to keep it as constant as possible. But also, yeah, from a fatigue point of view, that you just want to be as sharp as you possibly can. And I know when they're on race runs like this that it's not quite as tense as it used to be. Back in the refueling days, Ted, now you stick the fuel in it and you send the car from start to finish. Whereas when you had the refueling, of course, it was a race of mini sprints essentially. So you're always pushing much harder at all times. So you sort of get more into the rhythm now of tyre protection mode in a race run, and so I think it's a bit of a different physical element coming to the driver today than it once was. They have much higher loads from the cars. A small lock up there from Alonso in the middle of turn 2, or just before turn 10, so we missed the apex there. But yeah, so you have a much higher downforce, much higher downforce today. So when you are pushing the car with new tyres, there's a lot more load going through the body at all times. But yeah, I think in terms of how skittish the car used to be, I think that's quite a different ball game today. It's a heavier car, it's more lethargic, especially in slow speed, so you do have to give it some more time. Yeah, those old cars were quite alive at all times on their groove tyres and 200 kilos less weight, a narrower track and shorter wheelbase. It's quite amazing how the cars have grown in size over the years.
So McLaren drivers must think like you then, because that's what they're doing. They're doing Oscar, Lando, second day Oscar, Lando the same, so they've got something to compare, and then third day Lando, Oscar.
And is it the same at Mercedes as well? Is Mercedes doing that? Are they using half day? I think they might be using half days as well down there.
Got that detail here.
But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think that's clearly is driver led as well. Who wants to do what and when, and yeah, you come up with a plan altogether. You don't just jump in by chance. It's there's an awful lot of planning that goes into it beforehand.
No, that Mercedes are not, to our information.
Okay.
George is doing the whole of Wednesday, Lewis is doing the whole of Thursday, and then they're splitting. George is doing Friday afternoon, and Lewis is doing Friday morning.
Okay. Yeah, like I say, they would have come up with that plan before even coming here.
But is that not the last day in the afternoon of the most relevant times for the Bahrain Grand Prix, on the last day when the track's rubbered in? Would you not want to say, I'm going to do that, give me that time? Because Max isn't driving then either, it's Checo for the whole day on the last day.
You might want to push for that, but the track will continue to change. All I say is that the counter argument is that the track will continue to change through next week as well, through every session that you do. It's always slightly different. The subtleties are there for all of the drivers to feel. And then you look at someone like Lance Stroll, who missed all of it last year with his hand injury, and still performed at a really high level, I thought, in a car that was performing well as on top of that. So I think he pretty much maximised his own performance that week, just rocking up on race week. He had none of this. It was Drogovic doing it all.
Yep. You had a couple of moments for Max Verstappen all the way around this lap. We're heading to the exit of turn 4 here, and there was also a lock up at turn 8.
Yeah, it still looks like a bit of a heavy car to me, and that's catching him out quite a few times on this lap, the lock up into turn 8. We've seen others do that already as well. But yeah, it's things that you wouldn't expect a Red Bull with Max Verstappen behind the wheel to be doing. And the wind, we see it again. We saw, I think it was, who was it? Was it Magnussen before getting caught? Piastri on one of his hot laps going wide in turn 11. So yeah, the wind has definitely caught him out there in turn 11.
I have a question about front tyre lockups. Can I ask? With so many more teams copying Red Bull's anti-dive front suspension geometry, which, as we know, lends itself to slower tyre warm-up because you're not putting as much energy through that tyre. Are we going to see drivers who are unused to that suspension geometry suddenly having many more front lockups and thinking, whoa, what have you designed here, lads? I've got all these front tyre lockups, and then saying, yeah, well, you know, that's what you get.
And girls.
Sorry, no, yeah, no. That's what you get with that anti.
The anti-dive. Yeah, so basically
that's a characteristic.
Yeah, so just to explain from a driver's point of view what's going on there when you're talking about the anti-dive nature of the car, you know, it's a bit like being on a bicycle. If you want to slow down as quick as possible, you want to use more of the front brakes than the rear, because the rear will just start to slide and just sort of tag along behind you, snake around behind you. So as the weight transfer goes forwards, you can then apply more pressure to that front brake. Of course, on a bicycle, if you go too far with that, the thing's going to endo and spit you off over the top of it. So a similar kind of thing happens in the car, and you feel that. You feel the rear go light, and it starts to snake around. That's not good for corner entry into a slow-speed corner. You want it, or even a medium-speed corner, say like turn 6, for example, here. You're braking a little bit and turning it at the same time. You're asking a lot from the rear of the car because the weight transfer has gone forwards. You can mitigate that to some degree by brake bias. In the same way on a bicycle, you'll then have to bleed off the front brake and use a bit more of the rear brake. But the best thing you can do is actually sit yourself backwards over the rear axle and apply more front brake pressure, because then you're stabilizing that weight transfer. And that's exactly what the anti-dive is doing on these cars. So if you go too far, imagine if you had really long arms, if you were Mr. Tickle, and you could place yourself so
This is the
far over.
best explanation I have heard in years.
You then go too far, and the front would start to lock up. That's when you've gone too far on the anti-dive. So it's that relationship between the brake bias and the anti-dive that you're looking for. So you can start to find a happy balance, quite literally, between that, the brake bias and the dive of the car, by playing around with those tools. If you don't have the tool available of the anti-dive suspension, it's not just like you stick it on and there you go. You can tune it. It's a tunable device.
Excellent stuff from Mr. Davidson.
I got Mr. Tickle into a
Mr.
serious
Tickle.
analysis.
And now we're going to hand over to Mr. Buxton downstairs.
Thank you so much. Let's carry that Mr. Tickle chat through, because I wonder how long George Russell's arms actually are. There's a lot of work going on the front of this Mercedes. You can see the guys pouring in to the front of the tub where the pedals are, but I don't believe it's a pedal issue. You can also maybe see the steering column just coming down the middle there as it attaches to the front axle, and the guy's doing a lot of work on that. Now, famously, last year we heard a lot of talk from Lewis Hamilton in particular about how he was unhappy with the driving position within the cockpit of this Mercedes. The team, as we understand it, has moved that driving position back about 5 to 10 centimetres, and with that, of course, comes a consideration of that steering column and how close or far away the steering wheel would be from the driver, having changed that very important part of the car. Anthony, as a driver, clearly, how key is it you've got the correct length away from you of the steering wheel? And also, am I right? Does that look like what they're doing there? To me, it looks like a little bit of work on the steering column.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they're turning there, Will, but yeah, it could be exactly what we were talking about before, with that relationship of how much the car dives under the braking zone. But in terms of the actual steering wheel distance to the driver, it is really important. I always found that if you had the steering wheel a bit, if you set yourself...
We've got Alex Albon pulling off to the side of the road whilst we look at the work down in the Mercedes garage. And he is going to bring out a stoppage here.
Is this the first red flag?
I think it is.
It will be, yeah.
And in yesteryear, he used to get this all the time. We've taken for granted the amount of running that they can do out of the box in recent times. But the yellow flag waving in Sector 1. Alex Albon bringing his Williams to a halt. The car that we saw last in terms of the the launch spec. They didn't have a launch spec that bared any resemblance to what they're running now, but an issue for Albon with 21 minutes to go. And session still being run for the moment, as he's managed to pull off fairly out of the way.
Well, there is a gap. I mean, maybe I'm talking too soon. There is a gap. You don't need to red flag it if he can just get manoeuvred into that access gap.
So that access gap where he is take you through to turn 9 and 10.
Yes, on the back of it, yeah.
It's a good place to watch
So
if you ever find yourself nearby.
Well out of the way where he is. Interestingly, he's still just remains sat in the car. Let's have a listen to this.
It's like the engine's gone into...
It's like
fallen away.
Yeah, it's like he instigated that. He backed out of it very early on. He was still changing gears, and he managed to go down a few gears and get it into neutral, and then he physically turned it off as well.
Saw the warning lights.
No smoke or anything coming out the car. It's hard to see.
James Unwin, his engineer, there, not saying anything.
Not a lot of communication at the moment. Will Buxton is making his way down to Williams. And he has found his way down to Williams. Over to you, Sam.
I have, and all of the gang were actually waiting out in the pit lane for Alex Albon, ready and waiting just for a very normal end of run. I wonder if he's run out of fuel. I'll find out. I'll try to.
Thank you very much. So you'd... you run it out of fuel usually towards the very end of the session.
I was going to say,
traditionally,
when I first saw that, I thought this could be a fuel run-out test, as they call it. But I quickly looked up and I saw there's 22 minutes still remaining in the session, and the time continues to tick down. Still that yellow flag at Sector 1.
I think when we first saw him stop, him looking around, doing a scan of the instruments on the new Williams steering wheel integrated with dashboard information, might suggest that it wasn't something he was expecting. Unless they don't tell the driver about a fuel run out,
So the lights
he's got it started again.
Look, Ted, the lights are back on the steering wheel. So he had turned it off.
Oh, now they've died
and they're
again.
gone off again.
I think it's a glitch rather than a planned thing, unless Williams are playing an elaborate jape on Alex and not telling him about a fuel run out. Yeah, Unwin is discussing with him, trying to get the car going again. I suppose it is to be expected. You know, they are the last ones to actually have a car ready and going. Came straight here, did a filming day, and he's being wheeled off.
The light's green on top of the roll hoop as well, so the car is safe, despite the marigolds that are being worn there by all the marshals. But I think that's just protocol now these days with these hybrid cars.
Must say it's looked a good car. You know, it seems as the plan, the aim for Williams this year is just to remove all of the peaks and troughs to get a more benign car that allows Sargent and Albon to do anything with, to mean that they're not going to go places and not know how the car's going to go. They're not going to have to, Alex isn't going to have to do those, you know, slightly, is desperate the wrong word, blocking moves on everybody else at the front of DRS trains and try to get a car that's more user-friendly across the track to start. I did watch a previous Verstappen track to start, and it was mint. It was absolutely brilliant. That looks a pretty good one as well.
The only trouble there, Ted, is that it looks like quite a different surface to where they're starting compared to what the track's like.
Yeah, but it's your only choice. It's the only choice.
Yeah, I know it's the only choice. Just yeah, I wonder if you've actually got more grip on that concrete surface with the rubber on top of it compared to this. The abrasiveness of the track he's on now.
So the Williams cleared?
Yeah, we've gone.
Yellow flag.
Yeah, clear in sector,
and we escaped without a red flag. So
how soon I spoke. That's a lesson to me in a commentary box.
I thought that would be I was with you. I thought that would be a slam dunk red flag, and on we went.
That would have been a slap on the wrist there, Ted, from Murray Walker.
Don't say anything until it's happened.
Exactly.
Yes, if you weren't with us earlier, Ted, 6 months into his Formula One career, was the commentary box producer for Murray Walker.
Standing in this very position.
Back in, this is 1997, isn't
97,
it, Ted?
yeah.
There we go.
Between 97 and 2001.
And then they had the bright idea of putting you downstairs in the pit
down
lane.
the pit lane, yeah.
The rest, as they say, is history.
Rest has been a terrible mistake. So yeah, I said
Maybe they just wanted him out of the commentary.
stood here.
Yeah.
Murray was in that corner where you are. Martin would be there, and I would have a panel to the producers, and
It's a nice picture of you, Ted.
It's terrible. I look annoyed for some reason, and I would be
then.
And I would be talking to Martin, but I wouldn't talk to Murray Walker because Murray didn't like to be interrupted with talkback. So I devised a cue card system to tell him. I had them laminated so they wouldn't, I could use them at every track around the world. So it would start from the usual one: start, stop, no more commentary, and of course at ITV Sport at the time between '97 and 2008 we had ad breaks. So there was, you'd throw to a break, pick up again, James in pits, and it would say Louise in pits as well. So you'd put that in his field of vision.
I like it.
Throw to James Allen in the pits,
like a
or
board
Louise,
over the pit wall.
or Louise Goodman, so that I didn't have to bother him in his flow of commentary with talkback, because not everyone likes talkback.
I like the behind-the-scenes knowledge. That's excellent stuff. Will has made his way to Williams, or stayed at Williams, I should say.
I have, mate. As I understand it, a reliability issue, but I don't think we're a million miles away if we suggest it might have had something to do with fuel, be that intentional. Well, it sounds like it wasn't intentional, but yeah, that's what I'm hearing at the moment. A reliability issue at Williams, but yeah, I don't think fuel is a million miles away.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buxton. Max Verstappen pushing on. This is his 60th lap of the day. He has a 1:32.5, which was clear of everyone. There's a picture of me now on the side of the screen, so the graphics team have been busy over the winter as well. Excellent to see. So Verstappen, who's either been looking a little bit ragged, but that one lap he did, the 1:32.5, looked very collected indeed on the medium compounded tyre as he brings it around the 14th and technically 15th corner on the racetrack, and logs another as he comes across. And 1:36.1. A reminder, if you're fairly new to this testing lark, the time's not the most relevant until we get to the final day. All about the mileage on this opening day of the year.
Yeah, Verstappen looking a little bit more at ease, I'd say.
Yeah, it looks good. It looks good, doesn't it?
It looks better. I mean, it wasn't earlier on in the day. It looked like a handful from the car. Looks good. It's well poised over the bumps. That's one thing that's been consistent from the start of today compared to where we are now. But yeah, Max definitely was wrestling around with the car a lot, and seems to be in a bit of a happier place now with it, at least.
Let's go into some greater detail then with the Red Bull, and send it across to Sam Collins, our technical analyst.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for that. One of the things I absolutely love about this time of year, pre-season testing, is that the teams do not get to keep their secrets anymore. We finally get to see quite a lot of the bits they get to bring to the circuit. And what I want to take a look at is this on Max Verstappen's Red Bull. Something that we've all been talking about is their side pods and how they've changed their cooling system this year to sort of follow the early season Mercedes from last year. But take a look at this, just behind Max Verstappen's head. Nobody else has really picked up on these as far as I can tell, but two absolutely huge cooling inlets either side of the driver's head. Red Bull are taking a huge amount of cooling air from the car, and I'll show you where that is on the car as you roll forwards, because we can see the car coming through the corner here, and you'll be able to see, I can see what Ted Kravitz is doing, making me giggle, but just to show you where these are on the car as I roll the clip slightly forward, I'll just highlight that for you because it's really hard to see them. And at the launch of the Red Bull, you can just see it there behind the driver's head. At the launch of the Red Bull, the team had these parts completely covered up, blanked off, made to look like a bit of the cockpits around, and all of our attention was focused on where was the normal Red Bull side pod inlets. Well, I can tell you they've got two conventional side pod inlets. Well, they're not that conventional. You'll see them just when this mechanic gets out of the way. And you can see two inlets here. One lower inlet, very much a small slit, very similar to what Mercedes used last year, but much, much tighter. And then one, some people are calling it a shark inlet, higher up, just underneath this upper protrusion of the top of the side pod. So triple cooling inlets either side of the Red Bull. And that's something we haven't really seen before. So Red Bull really pushing their design to a new level. And this is crucial on making the Red Bull zero pod, if you want to call it that, concept work in exposing the top edge of that floor. Because what Mercedes struggled with, and moving Lewis Hamilton and George Russell forward in the cockpit, was that they had to move all the cooling system into the middle of the car. Well, Mercedes never quite made that work. They had to move the drivers back, as you can see on the onboard camera for this year. But Red Bull haven't seemed to need to move Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez in the cockpit forward at all, because I think they've realigned their cooling system with those shoulder coolers that, Ted, you were just doing a great impression of.
Well, not only, thank you, Sam, not only have we seen it, we've logged it, we've figured out what they're doing, and we've come up with a name for it, Sam, already. So they are the bunny rabbit ears cooling devices either side. But Russell on a good lap here, Ant, before we come back to the cooling.
Russell looking good in this first sector. It's a personal best for him. We'll see if we can get Ted to do the impression down the camera for you in a minute. But we continue on a good lap for George Russell. Talk us through the rest of that.
Yeah, it looked pretty good in turn 10 actually, just the exit. You could get on power nice and early. A little bit of a twitch there on the rear of the car midway through turn 11, but still okay. Almost fully pinned through turn 12. I think it was just a brief lift there, which they were all doing all the way through last year as well. Apart from in qualifying, that one lap where they could take it flat out. So yeah, another personal best in the middle sector. Turns into the final corner, a bit of understeer with that wind before you head towards the headwind coming out of the corner. So it should be a best lap for Russell. Yes, it is personal best in all three sectors to go 1.6 down on Verstappen's best time. So yeah, a slight improvement. Yeah, car to me still looks like it's a little bit similar to how the Red Bull looked earlier on, still a little bit on the heavier side, a little bit lethargic in its change of direction, but I'd say the traction looked pretty good actually, out of turn 10 especially.
Alex Albon continuing the debrief there. If you are just switching on or pressing play, excellent to have your company. The only issue of note falling the Thai driver's way earlier in the session, where he pulled off right about there. And the team saying it was a reliability issue. We do not have confirmation of what exactly was the problem. As we go back now to Yuki Tsunoda.
They've cleaned the car. That's one obvious difference from the last time we saw him driving. Gone is the flow of his paint from most of it. Maybe I can see on the tip of the nose, just a little bit lurking. But yeah, comes into turn 8. Difficult corner, that one, downhill braking. And it's tempting to brake quite late because you're building up the speed on the exit of 7 and then slow it back down again after the run from 8 through to turn 9 and 10. They usually take that gear they take that corner in 3rd gear just to help to maximize the traction more than anything on the exit. And then 4th gear through turn 11, waits for it mid-corner because you got the tailwind and backs out of it a lot through turn 12. He's on a slower lap here, really taking care of those tyres. You see the difference between how Russell could attack that lap he was on compared to where we are now with Tsunoda. So into the final corner, and the car turns in quite nicely, but he's made sure he's given himself a lot of time there by braking early. And you can fall foul quite easily on this track by overloading the tyres in a longitudinal sense by braking too late, and you can, one corner often leads into the next, and these tight corners like here and 1 into 2, and it's better to always be like driving on the defensive side around this track. I always found, especially on a race run, by braking early, imagining and assuming that the car is going to start breaking grip very early in the corner, and as soon as you start to hustle the car too much around here, it's not going to pay off. The track's going to bite you.
There he is, there's Alan Permain.
There he is.
Hello, Alan. Nicknamed Bat from his early times at Benetton, because they used to say he only comes out at night. Maybe he will or won't like me explaining why his nickname is Bat, but that's the way it was explained to me. So I've got to go. Just one last thought on the, because it's the interviews 1400 local time. On the Red Bull cooling.
And
that Sam
dared
was
to look at
talking
his
about
watch is what had happened there.
I wonder if it looks that, so there's the bunny ears cooling either side of the,
How does it?
either
Yeah,
side of
quite.
the, I'm holding my, I can't do it with both, either side of the driver's head. Then there's the vertical slot cooling, and then the other bit, what I'm calling the overbite, is a bit like picture a jet fighter.
Yeah.
You know, they have the wing, and I've got a ready picture for you here, Anthony. I know it doesn't help.
First overtake of the season.
Here we go. Down the inside. No, I'll behave.
There we go.
It's still way too early for all of that. And Verstappen makes his way through. Sorry, Ted.
So it looks a little bit like the air intake of a jet fighter, under the wing, at that kind of angle. At an angle where the top edge is facing forwards, and then it sort of goes back as to the back edge. So flipped a different way from last year, where that was on top of that little winglet, the side impact structure, and then it took the air from the top of that. So underneath, and it wouldn't be the first time that Adrian Newey or any of these designers have taken a cue from aerospace and you know, airplanes and fighters and aircraft in a kind of idea of how to get the air most efficiently into cooling the car. Anyway, that's what it looks like to me. Right, I will speak to you from the pit lane later, but I've got to go and interview whoever's in the press conference afterwards.
Very good, Ted.
Excellent stuff, Ted. Thank you for joining us up here in commentary. We will hear from Ted down in the pit lane and we review the move down into turn number 1.
The move, the first move of the year. Look at that. And it was a Red Bull overtaking a Ferrari. Who would have guessed? Obviously on different programs. You see actually the rain light was flashing on the Ferrari as well, so a bit of extra harvesting going on at that point. The Red Bull wasn't. And yeah, poor old Charles Leclerc has to already be staring at the back end of a Red Bull.
Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen have had some excellent wheel-to-wheel battles in their time in the sport, but Leclerc will love it if he's in the mix like that come Saturday in a week's time.
Yeah, no more so on this circuit as well. We've seen some epic racing between those two. It was in the 2022 season, wasn't it? Absolutely fantastic stuff. Trading places at the front, lap after lap after lap. Hopefully we can get back to that stage again. But for now, Red Bull have definitely set the bar very high.
Well, you just heard Ted describing the aggressive updates that they've brought for this year. It would have been very easy given their percentage of wins standing at 95% for the season last year to go for an evolution. It looks like it's dramatic. Talking of dramatic, the Flow is giving you a great illustration of what they're checking on the McLaren there, the front end of the McLaren.
Yeah, it's nice just to see the separation from the suspension area that we were talking about earlier on, and what an impact that has aerodynamically. And then you see just the trails coming off. I mean, no aerodynamicist, of course, but it's just interesting to see where the airflow takes the paint, just from the suspension side and through the side of the side pod. The bit we'd love to see, though, really, is if you could do that on the underside of the car and then see what happens to the trails of the paint under the car. That would be very cool, but unfortunately we'll never, ever see that. The most secretive part of a Formula 1 car these days.
On board with Oscar Piastri. Piastri, who had a slightly slow start to the day, but that all looks like it was baked into the program. He's done 53 laps. McLaren, the story of their pre-season tests in the recent couple of years, poor, slow starts. McLaren are looking to be fighting where they were towards the end of last year. Fantastic update throughout the season, then matched by Ferrari in the final stages, but they're just hoping to be way more competitive than they have been in the last 2 years, as we look at Tom Stallard there, whose voice you will hear talking to Oscar Piastri throughout this season on the team radio.
Well, do you remember where McLaren were? They were in a really desperate state, weren't they, when they came here with the overheating of the brakes? And I mean, to the point where I believe they almost didn't race. They needed to be flying out new parts after the test. They hardly did any laps at all in the test. They kept overheating those brakes time and time again. And another overtake here. Everyone's getting involved now. This Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, as he pounds out on his race runs, is getting overtaken left, right and centre. Hopefully that's not the story come Saturday
Very good.
afternoon
Very good.
next week.
Saturday
Nearly
klaxon.
caught out.
Saturday klaxon, Grand Prix Saturday, etc., etc. Get the graphics made.
Someone's going to get it wrong at some point. Don't be that person.
Tell everyone you know it's a Grand Prix Saturday to start the season. Round 2 as well in Saudi Arabia, a Grand Prix Saturday. And then we revert to the usual all the way until the end of the season by the time that we get to Las Vegas for the second Las Vegas Grand Prix. Minute to go in the session. Red Bull are top of the page with Max Verstappen. It's a 1:32.548, 66 laps for Verstappen, 63 for Leclerc, 77 for third place Fernando Alonso. And we're just looking at his former teammate Esteban Ocon completing his last action of the day. Many teams swapping over in the lunch break, so a bit of practical changes for the teams to get done.
And for people that are reading into these lap times, you've got the performance runs, it's all we can go by at the moment. And there's looking at Tsunoda up there, and many people say, oh, see, look, it's a Red Bull copy, that's why he's up there in P5 with a 34.1 against Verstappen's 32.5. Well, don't forget, Tsunoda and that team have traditionally been very quick around this track.
If you're watching on Sky Sports main event, you are now leaving us. The wrap-up continues on Sky Sports F1. And we're on board with Charles Leclerc for the final moments of this opening morning of pre-season testing. I say morning, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon local time, the first session of the season. And Charles Leclerc pushing on to the line. Verstappen is back in the pits. Alonso is back in the pits as well. And we're going to see the other drivers on the left-hand side of your screen for the second session. Checkered flag is out. And apart from the Williams of Alexander Albon, everyone having a really successful start to things. Not a lot of drilling down there, suggesting major changes in the pit lane. Ultra reliable, lots of mileage logged, lots for the engineers to pour over. Yep. Here is the returned Williams that we were mentioning.
Almost had a red flag, but we didn't, so we're still red flag free. Easy for me to say. So yeah, the Williams comes back into the garage. Was it just a fuel issue? Maybe it's like a fuel pickup problem or something, because we didn't see any, like I said at the time, any telltale smoke coming out of it. The bodywork was all intact, everyone looked calm, the driver stayed in for a long, long time. Verstappen there chatting with GP, his engineer. Had so much success together as a partnership. And topping the timesheets for what it's worth, straight away as well in this day one first practice session in the morning.
It is worth saying, first day, first session, it is not much to read into at all, but also, of course, it's him.
Of course, it's like a dog marking a lamppost.
You've been the king of analogies this morning. Off to a fine start as Oscar Piastri completes his session. 4th fastest there. More important was the fact that after that slow session, starts of the session, he was able to get 56 laps on the board. And Tsunoda in 5th and Russell in 6th. There's 3rd place Fernando Alonso. He had 77 laps out of the box.
And I think that car has looked good as well. I think consistently one of the best cars out there. Fernando straight to work, looked good immediately. And yeah, the car for me is, they were good here last year. And I think I'm already reading the car that looks pretty decent at this stage. Let's wait and see, but just in terms of how well balanced it was, how at ease the driver seemed to be, it looks good so far for them. Russell as well, a good lap quite late on in the session to improve his best time. And actually the car, apart from looking here and there a little bit unstable over some of the more bumpy parts of the track, it's not aerodynamically porpoising like we've seen in the past on this track. It's more just how it's banging over the bumps. There was the thing, what was he doing here? He's going onto the grid? I didn't expect him to pull into the pit lane like everyone else is.
Russell continuing over the line, going past our commentary box. Don't know if he's alone in treating himself to a practice start.
Nobody else has.
No, no one else has, but the burnout
point.
Yeah, burnout's being completed by George Russell.
And look at that, opt for pole position spot on the grid.
Knows where he's aiming for. And completes the practice start. Let's listen in. Release the clutches. And away he goes. Practice start. You were making the point that it's not quite the surface down there in the pit lane. Maybe he fancied the real thing to get a baseline rather than just leaving the pits and doing one.
I mean, I don't know why other teams didn't do that. So yeah, strange. He was the only one to do it.
So George Russell having a practice start all on his own, and this is the story of day one, session one, with Max Verstappen fastest with a 1:32.5, 66 laps on the board. For reference, Bahrain Grand Prix length is 57. Charles Leclerc, 64 laps on the board. Fernando Alonso had 77. Then Piastri had exactly a race distance, 57. It was 64 for Yuki Tsunoda. George Russell put 48 laps on the board. Bottas 68, 40 for Alex Albon, who pulled to the side of the road with a reliability issue. And it was 60 laps and 66 laps for the drivers in 9th and 10th, Esteban Ocon and Kevin Magnussen. So more to come as we remind you of the schedule. We've got the afternoon session from 3 o'clock local time, and then the floodlights will illuminate, and then we're doing it all the way through Thursday and Friday, and then it is the 1 week countdown to the first Grand Prix of the year. But that is your testing schedule. Right, thanks to everyone who's frequented the commentary box for this opening pre-season test session of the year. We've got 4 hours to come your way in the afternoon session. Join us then when Formula One returns for pre-season testing.
me know for place. I think you can see it. Okay. I don't need to let you know. You stick with the plan, no attack for now.
Every time Hamilton goes off, please report it.
I mean, he's going off every lap everywhere. I'm not going to talk the whole time. It's kind of slow, mate. Okay, copy.
Okay, Lou, so we now have a black and white flag for track limits. It's turn 10.
They can't keep it on the track, the car won't turn.